And we are live. Welcome, everybody, to the MLB Deeper Dive. I am Eric Lindquist. That is Adam Scherer here on the other side. We're going to go break down this another Wednesday slate, double-digit games. Always a nice feeling to get those on the board. But Adam Scherer at Ship My Money DFS over on the Twitter sphere. How you doing, my dude?
Doing pretty well. Still kind of sweating the early slate, which was looking a lot better like 20 minutes ago. But yeah, early slate's kind of fun. Still have some decent teams there to pay attention to. And then now we get an 11-game main slate, or 10.5-game main slate, I guess.
Isn't it nice when you don't play the early slate and then your team, and Miguel Sano specifically, you just like miss out on your entire year of losses in the opportunity to reclaim them? It's the worst.
It wouldn't even make you feel better. Like, I don't know, that always pisses me off too, when it's like I roster a guy all the time at low ownership, and then when he, like, even if I played him, when he does do well, he's like 40% owned, so it's not even like you really get it back.
Yeah. What do we need to cheer for during the show so that I can know if a home run alert pops up, then I'm going to go frantic?
I don't even know. I have a team in like ninth place, but it's like a Minnesota stack, so I'm sure it's competing with like 100 other teams. I don't know. Perfect.
Chalk donkey. How about that? You go you. You know what, though? Minnesota home runs, I'm never going to argue with it. They've been a disaster the last two games. No Pineda win, no Maeda win. Chalk going off everywhere. But you know what? I think the tides are changing. We are ready to rock here. But of course, we're presented today by JockMarket. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. All of those things go a long way at helping us here at Awesemo. But otherwise, let's get into the games right off the bat here. On the top, Washington. We have now it's all the way up to plus 205 here on the board here, plus 195. But going up against Philadelphia, Zach Wheeler on one side, Patrick Corbin on the other. Maybe 3 years ago, this would be like an absolute pitching duel with a total that would be bordering 6.5. Not the case with Patrick Corbin in his current iteration. Talk to me about pitching here.
Yeah, it's one really, really good pitcher and one pitcher that was really good not very long ago, but hasn't really shown that this season. So I think Wheeler, clearly one of the top pitching options today, going up against a just depleted Nats team, basically. We don't have the lineup yet, but Trey Turner tested positive for COVID after leaving yesterday's game early. So safe to say he won't be in the lineup. The team in general is just banged up right now. We've talked about them recently, how it's kind of Trey Turner, Juan Soto, Josh Bell, and then everyone else. Now it's Juan Soto, Josh Bell, and everyone else. 3.2 implied run total for Washington. Wheeler's getting a lot of ownership, and I think it's deserved. It's a spot where, you know, clearly if a pitcher is going to be 50% owned, there are alternatives that you can go to if you have a more popular lineup outside of him. But I just don't really have any issue with Zach Wheeler at his current ownership in this matchup. On the other side, Corbin, I just don't really see getting to here. I think Philadelphia is a dangerous enough offense. It's a good park for hitters. Corbin's only struck out about 16% of right-handed hitters this year. He's given up power to righties. And then also just looking at the ownership projections that we have right now for DraftKings, outside of Andrew Heaney at 7,400, we basically have no ownership going to any pitchers below $8,500. To me, that it doesn't necessarily mean that all cheap pitchers are bad plays. It just means that there's a lot of cheap hitting on the slate. So it's probably not going to end up being that necessary once you actually build lineups to get to inexpensive guys. So there's going to be a lot of guys that are cheap that I think individually are going a little bit under-owned, but then once you start building lineups, you're going to realize they're not necessary. Corbin is one of those guys. Like, he's getting 1% ownership. So yeah, he probably should be like 3 or 4% owned, but it's also just not a spot where I expect to be getting to Corbin.
Looking at this slate last night, I write the MLB slate starter article every single day of the week. Wrote one every single day of NBA. I'm going to try my best to hit every single day of MLB from when the switch came over. But MLB slate starter, we basically just dive into different pitching situations, things that seem a little bit more predictable the night before. I got to say, this is one of the easier pitching slates that I've ever tried to break down in my life. I think it's pretty straightforward. I think also looking at the top pitchers tool does a pretty good job just showing how good of a play Zach Wheeler is compared to the rest of the field here. 29.2% top two pitcher percentage. With a double-digit slates, we never see that kind of a number going for him. So nearly 50% ownership. I'm still fine being there. How about you?
Yeah, so am I. And that's kind of, when you look at the top two pitcher tool, it kind of just goes back to the way I view pitchers versus the way I view hitters, since they only take up one spot in your lineup and they are more projectable. If you just look at these guys at the top with Zach Wheeler, Walker Buehler, Tyler Mahle, the three guys on DraftKings that are 10K plus, if you look at the top two pitcher percentage and then look at the ownership, you can easily see how it's an okay move to go from Wheeler to Buehler or even Wheeler to Molly, given that Wheeler is like 1.2x as likely to be a top 2 pitcher as Wheeler, but it's getting double the ownership or close to double the ownership. But the thing is, with it only taking up one roster spot and being more projectable, I typically am going to want to just get lower owned bats and then play what I think is the best pitching in a large percentage of my lineup. So even though I think you can make a strong case just looking at the pitching to say, oh, well, we'll go underweight on Wheeler, we'll go over on Buehler and Malley, I think that's fine. I still think the preferred option for me is going to be to go Wheeler and then differentiate with hitters.
So we got Loco there in the chat. He is the guy who's going to be keeping you apprised. The news god himself. I just looked this up. Larry C in the chat. Thank you so much, my dude. Always love having you in there every single day. You do a great job of helping us out. At Ken Rosenthal, he's the senior writer for The Athletic. He's been on MLB Fox forever. He just tweeted out that the Nationals and Philly game might be in jeopardy with the COVID outbreak. Trey Turner testing positive, which you had alluded to. We'll see how that ends up going. Obviously, that changes a lot of things, but that's why you also need to stick around for the MLB Live Before Lock show coming up after us with Josh and Greg. So no question about that. They'll have you covered. As far as hitters go, if this game's good to go, I'm assuming just the Philly side is really all we really have to talk about here. Against Corbin, anybody stand out specifically for you?
So one other thing to add to that, just because I happened to see someone in Slack say they were fading the Washington Philly game. They didn't say what their reasoning was. If your reasoning is the COVID outbreak, if the game doesn't play, don't play guys from the game. If the game plays, there's no reason to fade it. So I don't know what the reasoning was there, but just kind of worth pointing out. This isn't like COVID isn't a fourth inning rain delay where you're going to have to guess. They're either going to say we're playing or we're not, and then you know what to do. So
how much are you coughing? Like scale of 1 to 10. Just tell us right. how sore is your okay, then we can't play. I don't think it works like that. It's going to be an all or nothing, and we will be apprised. But again, have those at Awesemo MLB notifications turned on. The premium Slack notification. Again, News God, he's the man. He does all the work behind the scenes for us. But just finishing out hitters here, Philadelphia. I mean, all the guys up against Corbin. Who kind of sticks out to you the most? Because for me, it's just JT Realmuto is a fantastic catcher play all the time, especially facing a lefty here.
Yeah, You're going to look to right-handed power first against Corbin. That's where he's really struggled this year. I mentioned the 16% strikeout percentage earlier. He's allowed a 208 expected ISO to righties. Against lefties, he's still been competent. He has a 24% strikeout percentage, 157 expected ISO. But you have seven right-handed hitters plus Bryce Harper plus the pitcher in this lineup. So it's a lineup that sets up very well for Philadelphia. Harper, of course, hits left-handed pitching fine anyway. There's no real reason to shy away from Harper, but Realmuto stands out as a top catching option. I think Andrew McCutchen hitting cleanup at 3,800 on DraftKings looks very good. And then, obviously Harper, Segura, Hoskins are good plays as well, but Realmuto and McCutchen, I think, are the two that stick out the most.
All righty. Jorge Polanco, does that do anything for you?
No, I mean, it hurts more.
I'm sorry. All right, 2-run bomb. We're going to move on quickly. Miami plus 116, Baltimore 9.5 runs. Make Adam happy. Here we go. Let's just talk about his team that's also ungodly bad here. But I got to say, Jordan Holloway was really, really good in his first couple starts out of here. 28.6, 26.1 DK points at the beginning here of July. The 22nd then went back down to earth against San Diego, but I'm happy to write off San Diego. I like seeing the pitch count get up to 84 here. Going up against this Baltimore offense, any shot that I can talk you into some Jordan Holloway today?
I'd be more inclined if I thought that I was going to need to go that cheap on pitching today, but I just think that bats are pretty cheap, and I don't really like – I think there's going to be a lot of offense in this game, even though neither offense is particularly good. It's pretty warm and humid in Baltimore. It's a substantial park downgrade for Jordan Holloway here, and I still think the Orioles are just decent in terms of their at least power and their ability to hit. So I don't mind Holloway. I don't even mind Jorge Lopez at 5,300 on the other side, because I think he's more talented than a $5,300 price tag. It's just that I don't really think I'm going to need to get to either guy here. And it's not like it's a spot that I'm actively seeking out.
Yeah, I think both pitchers, that's probably the right way of saying it, is that I think that they can have some success. I think Jordan Holloway, just looking at it, Jorge Lopez, 20.7% K percentage, Jordan Holloway, 22.2. The thing for me with Holloway is he just kind of really limits that hard contact underneath 30%. That's a jarring number to be seeing for a guy down around 6K. I think you could just maybe, if he's getting to 84 pitches, maybe 90 pitches today against Baltimore. I think there's a case in large field stuff to maybe take a look here or there. Jorge Lopez, same kind of thing. He's really showing up in the top pitchers tool comparatively to the rest of the field on DK. Not something you need to concern yourself with on FanDuel whatsoever, but you said you loved offense here. I definitely think that that's a positive way of looking at this. It's in Baltimore. It's, 80 degrees, 66% humidity. What really stands out to you offensively here?
Everything, but
okay.
So we don't know what.
Sure.
We don't have Miami's lineup yet. We do know they won't have Starling Marte. They traded him to the Athletics earlier today. So that does downgrade Miami a bit. They just got Brian Anderson back recently, which made their lineup a little bit deeper, but now you take Marte out of it. So it's kind of back to being, you have a really good value bat in Isan Diaz if he's hitting second tonight. You have some power with Jesus Aguilar, Adam Duvall, and Brian Anderson. Outside of that, I don't think there's a ton to feel really good about. But as a stack, Miami right now has the 5th highest top stack percentage. They're going a little bit over-owned, but nothing too crazy. And then on the other side, ownership a little bit lower on Baltimore. Holloway, like you said, he's been pretty decent this year, but it is a big park downgrade for him. Baltimore is actually favored here with an implied run total just north of 5. Holloway has done a very good job in his limited time in the majors of limiting power. 110 expected ISO to righties, 136 to lefties. So there's nothing that really stands out individually against Holloway, but I do think there's still favorable price points on Baltimore. When you look at Austin Hayes at 2,900, Ryan Mountcastle at 3,900, DJ Stewart at 2,600, obviously Mullins and Mancini are just very good hitters in general. So I think 1 through 5, as usual for Baltimore, looks pretty good. There are a little bit of weather concerns in this game as well. Looks like there's supposed to be potential for storms here, but as of right now, I'm not too concerned about that, especially because we're not on pitching anyway.
Favorite stack between the two, Miami or Baltimore?
Baltimore, because the ownership's a little bit lower.
Okay, perfect. Next up, we're making all right time here. We're going to get through all of these. I think Milwaukee minus 150, going to Pittsburgh here, 9 total runs in this spot. We finally got a starter here for Pittsburgh, Max Kranick. Talk to me a little bit about him.
Yeah, so he was promoted from AAA today between shows because this morning he was still at AAA. But so far this season, he has made 6 starts at AAA. He's gone 26 total innings, only a 19% strikeout percentage for him at AAA. In his 3 major league starts, he's gone a combined 11 innings. He has struck out 22.4% of hitters in those starts. So I'm not really interested in him at 7K here. It's an okay matchup against Milwaukee, but nothing crazy. He threw 74 pitches against Arizona on July 21st. I'm assuming you can get around 75 pitches from him again here, but just doesn't seem like it's going to be a necessary spot to go to. As far as the Milwaukee bats go, they have the 3rd highest top stack percentage on this slate, but they're also projected to be a little bit over-owned. And I think the difference, they were an offense that I really liked yesterday. I think the difference, though, is that the pricing on them today is just really, really cheap. You have Omar Narvaez at 3,900, Garcia's at 3,600, Rowdy Tellez hitting 5th at 2,300, and they have nearly a 5 implied run total. So I think that they're going to just show up in optimizers a little bit more tonight than they did last night, and it's going to drive the ownership up and make them a team that they still look good, but that's less of a priority for me.
Yeah, 11-game slate, more pitching on the top end than the bottom end. I think all of that kind of factors into Milwaukee really standing out. 4.9 implied run total. It makes a lot of sense for me here today for sure. But as you said, that ownership is definitely up there, near 11%, 8% chance of being a top stack. Makes me kind of want to shy away a little bit. I don't want to say anything concrete. I'm not sure how it's going to work out. And the hitting environment looks pretty decent. 85 degrees, 60% humidity. No problem with Milwaukee. How about Pittsburgh on the other side of this? No Adam Frazier. He's in San Diego. RIP to him. Actually, no, not RIP. He's back to life.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. There we are. And looking at Ben Gamble now leading off for this team at 2.2K up against Adrian Hauser. Adrian Hauser is not very good. I mean, could we possibly be looking at going to Pittsburgh in this spot?
Yeah, I mean, kind of just a middle of the pack arm in Hauser. Not a lot of strikeouts for him. About 20.5% to righties, about 16% to lefties. He has done a good job of limiting power, though, with a 156 expected ISO to lefties, 130 to righties. And overall this season, he's only allowed a little over 1 home run per 9 innings, 4.24 xFIP, just kind of a decent real life pitcher, not a great DFS pitcher because he doesn't get a lot of strikeouts and he typically doesn't go too deep into games. I don't mind looking at like a $2,500 Gregory Polanco, a $4,300 Brian Reynolds, Gamble's leading off at 2,200. There are some cheap prices on the Pirates at especially the top and middle of this order. And as a stack, they're not getting much ownership. They're only coming in around 2%, but they also have about a 2% chance of being the top stack on the slate. So not going to get too carried away there, especially since Hauser's not going to pull any ownership himself.
Anything else to finish out this one for us?
No, I don't think so.
All righty. We have 2 new YouTube channels, and I've been fortunate enough to work with Lofty, with Greg, with, everybody that we have behind the scenes here at Awesemo, and in front of the camera here at Awesemo, bringing you guys 2 new spots. Matt Gajewski, a big part of the fantasy football product and the sports betting product going forward, both in college and the pros. But specifically, if you love what we do for DFS, I promise you're going to love the fantasy football and sports betting channels that we have coming out. Just click the pinned tweet in the YouTube chat that producer Jordan's going to be throwing out here in a second to subscribe to these channels. Make sure you have your notifications turned on too, because we have new videos that are dropping every single day. I just got done covering week 1 NFL lines with Lofty today. What a world. It is so exciting to have football just so close, a month and a half away. So get prepared. We will be producing those sports betting and fantasy football content videos around the clock. So make sure you stay up to date with them. If you want to check out some other free content we're offering, you can find our fantasy football rankings in front of the paywall right now underneath the Awesemo.com fantasy football tab. And for sports betting, you can check out the Awesemo odds tab for Odd Shopper and our MLB betting tools, which are just incredible. The strikeout tool, the home run prop tool, great ways to get your process going, but also great ways if sports are legal, sports betting's legal in your state, take advantage of those offers. All the promo codes we have on the site. That is the best way to sustain profitability here using the tools here at Awesemo. And again, they're in front of the paywall right now, so there's no reason not to try them out. Going to our next spot here, New York Yankees plus 117 going up against Tampa Bay, 9 total runs here, 4.5 implied for the Rays. I guess it's dropped a little bit, 4.1 here for the Yankees, but Nestor Cortez, Michael Wacha, not really going to be on the board for you if we're not looking at cheap pitchers today, correct?
Yeah, neither guy really showing up for me here. Michael Wacha is just more expensive than I would want to go to. The park is favorable for pitching, but a more potent Yankees lineup than we've had recently, and Wacha priced up a little bit. Cortez has posted pretty solid numbers this year so far, but just doesn't really seem necessary to go to against this Tampa Bay team. Although the lineup did get a little bit better for Cortez with Nelson Cruz scratched about an hour or so ago.
Yeah, that was kind of something that stood out that maybe made me think you could go to Wacha a little bit, but the K rate isn't there. The 517 expected slugging is just abysmal. It's not a very good spot for him. And Nestor Cortez, I think, is a pretty good pitcher down at 6,100 here. But the big issue there is I don't think you can rely on him to be pitching a whole lot more than 75 pitches in the spot. He had 35 on the 23rd. I mean, that was 5 days ago. I mean, what do you even think that pitch count could be?
Yeah, I mean, he said that he expects to be capped around 60, according to The Athletic.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm expecting you get like a few innings out of him. And so it's kind of like, yeah, he's an okay pitcher, but this just does not set up as a slate where I'm trying to, completely punt pitcher and then hope for 3 good innings from Nestor Cortez.
Yeah, and for the Yankees, they just got Aaron Judge back into the fray, 57.1%. I don't need to sell you on the reasons that Aaron Judge hits the ball hard and far. He can definitely do that. He can definitely strike out here too. But against a guy like Michael Wacha, that's a little bit neutralized. I don't know. Looking over at the MLB top stacks tool today, the Yankees, 3.6%, only 4%, but the top half of the lineup at least, there's definitely some upside to be had with Stanton and Judge, Sanchez, DJ LeMahieu. I mean, kind of getting back to form here. What are you doing with the Yankees?
I think the Yankees look pretty good here. Michael Wacha has actually posted decent strikeout numbers against righties at 23.5%, but he has continued to have issues with right-handed power this year, which is something that has plagued him for a lot of his career. He's allowed a 285 actual ISO this year, and it's backed up by a 287 expected ISO. You also have cheap pricing on pretty much all of these Yankees. Aaron Judge at 4,400 is a discount. LeMahieu at 4,100. Stanton at 4,100. Gary Sanchez at 4,200. These guys are all really cheap for the amount of power that they offer. And while Tropicana Field is a favorable park for pitchers, and there are certainly some balls that would be home runs in Yankee Stadium that are not going to be home runs in Tropicana, the guys in the middle of this order in particular on the Yankees have so much power that I'm not quite as concerned about them being hurt by Tropicana Field, because these guys just hit the ball so far when they connect. It's not, there are some spots where, or some hitters where, like, if you overlay their home runs to their home park, they just, really, really benefit by hitting there. But these are guys that just hit the ball so far on so many of their home runs. It's not as big of a deal. So as long as the ownership stays low on New York, I do like them here. I think it's a very high upside spot against Wacha.
I'm with you. I definitely like the Yankees today, which isn't something I say a lot because you get them in Yankee Stadium. The ownership's usually there already. But also, got to say these price tags, 4.1K on DK for DJ LeMahieu, 4.4 for Judge, 3.3 Odor, 4.1 Stan, 4.2 Sanchez. Pretty doable, pretty easy to pair with Wheeler, to pair with these other guys. I have no problem going that direction. And as for Tampa, if we're not going to get a lot of Nestor Cortez, I mean, we can kind of pick a little bit on New York here in this spot, but I think the pinch hitting risk, maybe on the back half of the lineup more so, but the Rays analytically driven, they're a smart baseball team. I don't know how much I really want to be playing Margot, Franco, Austin Meadows on this slate.
Yeah, same boat for me. Like, I don't mind getting into a little bit of Tampa because they are pulling virtually no ownership here at 1% with a 3.5% chance of being the top stack. But it just doesn't set up to, I don't think, as a particularly favorable spot. You're going to get, we'll call it 3 innings of Nestor Cortez, who's a pretty solid pitcher. And then you're just going to get the Yankees bullpen behind him, probably mixing and matching to some extent. So you can always take the approach of this lineup has power and they're not getting any ownership, but they're not really that favorably priced. And the park isn't great for hitting. I don't think that they're going to really be in advantageous matchups in most spots. So I'm not that interested in Tampa Bay, not to mention Cortez isn't getting any ownership. So that's, another box that the Rays just don't check here. They're not going up against a popular pitcher.
Well, pitching just got really fun tonight because Washington and Philly just got canceled. So postponed, should I say. So, wow. Top Pitchers Tool is going to get some revamping. I will make sure that we touch base on that as we go. But I mean, first impressions of that, I mean, this just kind of completely changes the pitching slate, right?
Yeah, Buehler is going to become really popular. Lucas Giolito is going to become really popular. Ownership on Tyler Mahle will go up a little bit. You'll probably see it filter also a little bit more to Fried and McGill in the mid-range. I still doubt that you really see much go to the cheap guys because I just don't really think it'll be necessary. You also potentially see Andrew Heaney go from like 40% to like, especially in higher stakes, like 55, 60.
Wow. Going to be fun. Going to be fun. Let's keep it moving. Then.
And again, those are just complete guesses on my part. But
and you know it, I think they're informed guesses. I mean, you play MLB every single day. You're one of the best players in the industry. I don't think it's going to be any shock that your impressions are going to be that of a lot of top players. So I think that it's definitely all of those points were noteworthy. And I think Giolito is going to be the one that's really going to be interesting to me because I already had my eye on him as a pivot off of all of these guys. Really like targeting KC with righties. And, we were both on the Dylan Cease wagon yesterday. He ended up being under 10%. Giolito's a much better pitcher still. So I like going to this spot for him, but we'll see where that ownership comes in at because it's going to be very, very interesting taking Wheeler off the board here. But moving ourselves along, we keep going. Atlanta plus 115. Going into the Mets, going into New York here for today. I don't know where that went here on my deal. There we go. Max Fried and Tyler McGill, 2 pretty decent pitchers, but maybe now that you don't have Wheeler, we should be talking a little bit more about them and their viability here.
Yeah, I already thought they looked pretty good, and they were getting not a ton of ownership with Fried coming in at 17%, McGill at 12%. Like I said, maybe that trickles up a little bit now as you spread Wheeler's ownership out. Maybe it doesn't. I don't think it'll go too crazy anyway. It might just be a few points here and there. But I think it's a pretty good spot for both pitchers. Jock Peterson is in the lineup for Atlanta, so it's a little bit more dangerous for McGill than it would have been if he missed tonight's game as well. But Tyler McGill so far has been good in the major leagues. He has struck out 27% of hitters, 0.9 home runs per 9 innings, 3.78 xFIP. Everything looks pretty good for him. He's he benefits from Acuna being out. He's done a good job of limiting power so far in the majors as well. Not a huge sample size, but 0.036 expected ISO to righties, 120 to lefties, both very, very good numbers. So I like McGill. And then Fried doesn't offer quite the same strikeout upside as McGill, but he still does a good job of limiting hard contact. He's struck out still a respectable 23.3% of hitters this year, 3.9 xFIP. And then the Mets are running out a pretty right-handed heavy lineup, which does somewhat mitigate Fried's strikeout stuff because he has struck out 21.7% of righties compared to 28.5% of lefties this year. But it also puts kind of some weaker bats out there for the Mets than you get when they run their normal, lineup against right-handed pitching. So I think it's a pretty decent spot for Fried. If I have to just choose between the two, I'd go to McGill because I think this iteration of Atlanta's lineup is a little bit worse than the Mets, and I think McGill has a little bit better strikeout stuff, but both guys are pretty similar to me, and I'm interested in both of them.
Yeah, and Max Fried keeping the ball down, 6.5-degree launch angle here on the season. Does give up a 404 expected slugging and bunch of righties here. Yeah, he's not going to be missing as many of these bats, but I can't really be getting to a whole lot of bats in these games. I mean, Jock Peterson, Freddie Freeman, I don't even want to talk about Ozzie Albies and Austin Riley after yesterday, but go ahead and talk to me about bats here.
Yeah, it's a spot that I think they're still cheap for the upside that they give you, but it just doesn't set up as nearly as good a spot as it did last night against Jared Eichhoff. On the other hand, we saw what the upside is. We know Austin Riley can hit balls really far. We know Freeman's really good. We know Albies is good. So you can still make the case to get to Atlanta now that they're getting a fraction of the ownership they were getting last night. But at the same time, it's a 10-game slate. Picking on Tyler McGill here isn't at the top of the list of things that I'm looking to do.
And Mets side, we talked about how he keeps the ball down, relatively stops the ball from getting hit hard, 34.3% hard hit percentage for Max Fried. But Pete Alonso is viable everywhere. The ownership isn't going to be there. Is he kind of a one-off you might be targeting today?
Yeah, I was going to say Pete Alonso and then the cheaper version in JD Davis. Both guys.
The cheaper and not nearly as good. Yeah. There we go.
Yeah. But still 255 plate appearances since 2019 against left-handed pitching for JD Davis, 265 expected ISO, 404 expected WOBA. The guy still has massive power. So poor man's Pete Alonso. But those two guys I think look fine as one-offs just because they do have so much power.
All right. Now we're looking around here. We've got no lineup out yet, but I mean, it's the doubleheader here for the Toronto Blue Jays. Now it's up to plus 120 here. It was plus 117 here a second ago, going up against Boston. This is going to be a 7-inning game, correct?
Yep.
All right. Well, this is a very interesting tournament spot, I think, just because of that narrative for it, because Toronto is still pulling nearly 5% ownership or top stack percentage, coming in under 1% ownership share. We know how potent they can be through 7 innings. This should be a competitive game here with the Yankees. And looking at the matchup here for them, I mean, this is definitely just a Tanner Houck's okay here. I don't know what to really do. Just talk about pitching first. Let's do that.
Yeah, so I'm not super interested in the pitching. I do think that Tanner Houck at 7,200 offers some upside. Because he's, I think, pretty good. His numbers at AAA have been good this year. His numbers in a limited sample in the majors have been good. About a 28 to 29% strikeout percentage at AAA, 31% in 5 appearances, 18 total innings in the majors so far. And he threw 87 pitches in his last major league appearance. So I think if he pitches well, can actually go relatively long. He only went 4 2/3 against the Yankees in that game where he threw 87 pitches. But I'm assuming they don't really have an innings limit on him. Like, if he's being efficient, I don't think they're going to just yank him at 4 innings or 5 innings. So some interest in Houck here at 7,200. Less interested in Matz. I think that the $1,000 price difference makes me less interested. The fact that he's going up against, he's a lefty going up against this really high upside Red Sox offense makes me less interested as well. So not planning to prioritize either guy. We don't have them in the top pitchers tool right now either, so can't look at those numbers. But if I have to go to one, I'd lean toward Tanner Houck.
That's why if you heard my brain spontaneously combust, it was because I clicked over on the top pitchers tool and couldn't find their names. So I was frantically looking for that. We still have Zach Wheeler on the top of it. Again, there's a lot that needs to get reworked. Our slate is completely different from the pitching department with no Wheeler. That was going to be an easy click, I thought, today, but no more easy clicks there because the ownership on a guy like Buehler is going to be outrageous. But I digress. That is not what we're talking about. Let's talk offense here because I think that's kind of primarily what we're looking at from both these teams. But again, it's a 7-inning game. How do you factor that in to your projections into what you're doing for the process today, knowing you're getting 2 less innings, but it's still the 2 probably best offenses on the entire slate?
Yeah, I doubt that I'll really get to them outside of maybe one-offs just because the slate's so big. So now we're down to a 10-game slate. 9 games outside of this, you're still talking about 18 teams that are getting 9 innings of baseball compared to here where you're getting 6 or 7 at bats, depending on what the score is and who's winning. So it's still really difficult for me to get there. I'm curious to see what happens with Toronto's top stack percentage because I think it's just like an error right now. For one, they have a 4-run implied total, so I don't know why they would have a higher top stack percentage than Boston in the same game. For 2, we have that disclaimer on the top stack tool that it doesn't factor in the difference between 7 and 9 inning games. So you would have to, adjust for that. But normally they just naturally end up being at the bottom anyway because the total's lower. So Boston and Toronto were both really high when I did the show with Josh this morning, and then they came down, or at least Boston came down. I'm guessing that Toronto comes down between now and lock as well.
Yeah, I would definitely have to agree with that. Oh man. Yeah. I think one-offs, you talk about the home run ability of both these teams. If you had to pick one-off, if I'm going to put you on the spot to pick one-off from this entire game, who are you putting into a lineup?
JD at 4,900. Okay. If I need value, I would say Renfroe. The answer is just like any right-handed power from Boston, but I would lean toward JD or Renfroe.
Yeah, Boston, if they're winning going into the 7th, they're not even going to get in it bad.
Right.
It's funny to think about them just getting 6 innings in this game, but
yeah, it's a high school baseball game.
That's fantastic. Love this thing. I do not love the doubleheader rule, but I understand it. I understand why it was implemented, and I understand why it exists. Hopefully we can get away from that very, very soon. But something you should not be getting away from is playing over at JockMKT, because JockMKT is turned the fantasy sports game into a stock exchange. It's a lot of fun. You don't have to wait until the end of the games to make money. JockMKT allows you to buy and sell shares directly in real time for real life money with guaranteed payouts for all the shares at the end of the night. With daily markets for MLB, NHL, when that comes back up, NBA will come back up later here too. NFLs are on the horizon, and PGA, you can make real money every hour, every minute, every second of any match or game. All you have to do is use the pregame IPO to pick up shares of your favorite players, then buy, sell, or hold during the game based on all of your analysis. If you're watching it in real time and a player gets pulled out of the lineup, a la Trey Turner, yesterday was a fantastic opportunity to sell those shares immediately. Try to reclaim anything that you could out of that. At the same time, there are opportunities if somebody comes in as a pinch hitter with the bases loaded and they're $1 on the app. Not the worst time to be logging on, finding them, taking advantage of that kind of a number, because everybody is in play there. It is such a fun game format to be going over there. So definitely be checking that out. Download the app to get started using our exclusive Awesemo promo code Awesemo, AWESEMO, for up to $50 bonus on your first deposit. It's an exclusive offer to all of you, so take advantage of that today. That's Awesemo for a $50 bonus. And thank you so much to JockMKT. Really enjoyed their interface. It's so easy, so clean to be playing on. You want to be checking that out. It's a great way to add to your portfolio for the games. Take advantage of your sports acumen, of your knowledge, everything you're learning here from Adam, some of it from me, but mainly Adam, let's be serious. I absolutely love playing over there, so check it out. Let's move ourselves along to Cincinnati -107 at Chicago Cubs. Talk about a game I wish was 7 innings. How about this game yesterday? That would have been great. Chris Bryant chalk donkey 9th inning home run like it was never going to happen. I mean, it was always going to happen, but Tyler Mahle on one side, that ownership's about to come up. It probably should here, but of course we're getting the wind blowing out in Wrigley. It's 85 degrees, 75% humidity. What are you doing with him today?
Yeah, so we just got the ownership update, sans the Philadelphia game. Mahle's ownership only jumped from like 10 or 11% to 14 to 15%. You saw a bigger jump in Buehler, bigger jump in Giolito. Heaney went from like 35 to 44%. Fried's up to 26. McGill's up 18. So you saw kind of similar to what we expected, where Buehler saw a pretty big jump. Giolito saw a pretty big jump. Mahle got a little bit of a jump, and then some ownership trickled down to those mid-range guys. But it still kind of sets up the same for Tyler Mahle, where I think he's the worst of now the 3 top pitchers, between himself, Giolito, and Buehler. Worst in terms of talent, has a tough matchup here in Wrigley, but also just getting half the ownership of Giolito and basically a third of the ownership of Buehler. So it is still a spot where I think mathematically it makes sense to consider him as a pivot in tournaments, but it still would depend on what the rest of my lineup looks like. I'm not looking at this like, oh, I think Tyler Mahle is a better play than Walker Buehler. If I have a low-owned team, I'm going to prefer Buehler because I think it's just a better spot. I'm going to prefer Giolito because I think he's better. But if I have a more popular team, if I'm going to, like, for example, Milwaukee, who we talked about earlier, getting some ownership, then maybe I'm more inclined to just say, okay, well, I'll just hope Tyler Mahle beats Walker Buehler, and I'd pass a lot of the field that way. So I think it's a very dangerous spot for him. I do still think he does have upside, though, because he has the now actually excluding Tanner Houck because he's only pitched 5 games in the majors. Tyler Mahle now has the highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 29.2%. So the upside is certainly there. It's just that he walks a lot of guys. He still gives up power. The hitting environment in Wrigley still looks pretty favorable. Not quite as strong a wind as yesterday, but looks like it's still blowing out and still relatively warm. So it's still a dangerous spot for him. Also a really bad Cubs lineup. I actually hadn't looked at it until right now, but no Javi Baez, no somebody else is missing. No Wilson Contreras.
Wilson Contreras.
Yeah. So you have Matt Duffy in place of Javi Baez. You have Robinson Chirinos in place of Wilson Contreras. So still a 5 implied run total for the Cubs, but a little bit weaker lineup, a little bit more upside for Tyler Mahle here. So very, very risky play, but does clearly have a ceiling.
Chirinos hitting 353 since getting picked up here by the Cubbies. 3 homers, 1.417 OPS. I'm going to say there's some regression coming for one Robinson Chirinos here at this point in time. That is pretty dumb to be looking at. He's not nearly the hitter Wilson Contreras is. I don't think anybody's going to be arguing that with me. Zach Davies also, wowzer, not very good. Gives up hard contact, 432 expected slugging, 279 expected batting average here, 15.5% K percentage is just abysmal. Walks dudes at a 12% clip. I mean, I know we're not looking at Zach Davies here, but Cincinnati, what are you doing with them at a 9.4% top stack potential and a 12% ownership share? Are they too owned for you today?
They're a team that I assume I'll be using to kind of fill in lower owned lineups because they are getting a lot of ownership, but I do think it's a good spot. They have the second highest top stack percentage on the slate. Davies doesn't miss a lot of bats. The hitting conditions look pretty favorable. The problem that you run into with Cincinnati is not only is the aggregate ownership on this team pretty high, but looking individually at the hitters in the lineup, everyone except for Kyle Farmer and Tyler Naquin is getting at least 10% ownership on DraftKings. Jesse Winker leads the way at 21%. So it's really difficult to make a Reds stack that looks good and that isn't just locking you into like 40+% ownership between those 5 guys. So I still think it's a very good spot. I don't think Zach Davies is any good. He doesn't miss a lot of bats. The Reds do have power in their lineup. They're reasonably priced. So I think all of that looks good. But the one thing Davies does have going for him is he's done an okay job of limiting power this year. 140 ISO to lefties, 163 to righties. So even though he doesn't miss bats, it's not like he always gives up a ton of power. I think it's likely that he does give up home runs here, but you can at least see how the Reds disappoint against a pitcher that does a decent job in general of keeping the ball in the park.
And of course, I think both of us, I mean, it depends if Tyler Mahle's ownership continues to go up. We'll see where it ends up getting closer to lock here, but the Cubs become an interesting talking point on this slate. They were the super chalk yesterday. And now we're looking at 7% ownership, kind of right in that range here, 5% chance of being a top stack. Ball's still going to be carrying here. Tyler Mahle gives up the power from time to time. As you said, 13.1 degree launch angle as well. So the ball's getting up in the air, in the wind. He walks dudes nearly 10% clip. What is your interest in going to the Cubs here?
I was more interested this morning when I thought that we were going to have more of a major league quality lineup, but I am still interested just because I think Mahle is a very volatile pitcher and he is getting some ownership. So not only are the Cubs a lot lower owned today than they were yesterday, and granted they should be. Tyler Mahle is a hell of a lot better than Vladimir Gutierrez, but you're also getting some ownership on Tyler Mahle, so it helps. If the Cubs do well, you're knocking off 15 to 20% of the field that has Mahle, and he walks a lot of guys. He does give up power. He's struggled a lot more with right-handed power than left-handed power this year, but I'm still not going to shy away from like Anthony Rizzo, for example. So it's a lot harder to like the Cubs, the full Cubs stack here, since once you get past Bryant, Rizzo, Wisdom, it gets really tough to feel good about anybody. But at the same time, Matt Duffy hitting fifth is cheap. Jason Hayward's cheap. Chirinos is cheap. And Ortega leading off is cheap. So you do at least get some value out of the less than good hitters in this lineup. So I do still like the Cubs in tournaments, just not quite as much as I would if we had Baez and Contreras.
Agreed. And same thing kind of applies to yesterday. I mean, I like that 1 through 4. If you were just going to try to get different, have like a 2 or a 3 man there. Today, it's pretty simple to just say Bryant, Rizzo, move on with your day. No.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. If you're going to build
you can throw Wisdom in there too.
Okay. Yeah. And Wisdom has a bunch of power as well. I mean, he was like Babe Ruth immortalized as a righty at the beginning of his tenure here this season. A little bit tempered expectations here at this point in time, but we are moving ourselves along. We've got 4 games to go here. Arizona -101 at Texas here, 9 total runs. Roof is closed there in Arlington. We've got Madison Bumgarner, 9.5K. What a pricing job by DraftKings there. Jordan Lyles, 6K on this side. Talk to me about pitching.
I really don't want to, but This is just like it's two pitchers that I don't think are very good. It's two offenses I don't think are very good in a park that has the roof closed, so the ball's not going to carry quite as much. I think Lyles is the inferior of the two pitchers. He's only struck out about 18% of hitters this year. He has allowed 2.13 home runs per nine, which is the most on the slate. So it does look like a good spot for Arizona. What they can do with that is anybody's guess, because it's not like they're a very good offense. But they do have the seventh highest top stack percentage on the slate at about 6%, only getting about 5% ownership, so slightly under-owned. And you do have some power. Cole Calhoun at 3,100 leading off, I think is a really good value option. Escobar is extremely expensive, but that is likely to keep his ownership down, and he does have power from the left side here against Lyles. So I like that, especially if you're stacking. And then, Cabrera is okay. Christian Walker has some power, and he's cheap. The only guy really picking up ownership on Arizona is Calhoun at about 14%. Other than that, Escobar is next at 7%. Everybody else is lower than that. So I do like the Arizona stacks here. It's just a pitcher that I don't think is very good in Jordan Lyles.
So I have to ask you about FanDuel here, because I think Madison Bumgarner is actually, his price tag is 6,400 over on FanDuel today, comparatively. And Jordan Lyles is 6,700. So you're looking at just a ridiculous disparity between the sites. Also a good idea to play on both sites. But at 6,400, I know that you're not the FanDuel guy, the aficionado or anything, but does that at least sound intriguing to you?
Somewhat. But the thing that it comes back to for me is, since you only have to roster one pitcher, the ownership's going to end up being even more concentrated on guys like Heaney, Buehler, and Giolito. And I don't think that hitter pricing is going to be something that really dissuades you from just spending a little bit more money than Bumgarner. Like, Bumgarner is getting 3% ownership on FanDuel, which is okay. He probably should be a little bit higher. But Tyler Mahle's only $900 more, getting 9%. I think that's a spot that looks a little bit better. I think that, even looking to like DeSclafani, he's 2K more, but it's probably just not going to make that much of a difference as far as what else you can do with your lineup. DeSclafani getting the same ownership as Bumgarner. I think DeSclafani is just a better pitcher. Tyler McGill getting 8%. It's okay to go to Bumgarner. Like, if I'm playing 150 lineups in tournaments on FanDuel, I assume I would have some Bumgarner, because this Texas lineup certainly can strike out at a high rate. And most of the dangerous bats on Texas are left-handed, which Bumgarner has been, as you would expect, Bumgarner's been better against lefties than righties this year. He has a 27.7% strikeout percentage against lefties compared to 22% against righties. So there is definitely a path to Bumgarner doing well here. It's just that I still don't think I'd be like jamming him in even at that FanDuel price.
You just gave a FanDuel take in depth. I don't even know what to believe anymore. The DraftKings man himself. Look at you go. You're all grown up. Joey Gallo, Adolis Garcia. I don't think anybody's going to say that they're bad plays. I will say that they are expensive compared to a lot of other guys in the range. You're actually not too bad. 5K Joey Gallo, Adolis Garcia, 4,100. Very doable, I guess. Looked a little bit worse here earlier. Must have had the wrong thing up. That's fine. I really don't want to play anybody else in this lineup. It's just complete garbage. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, pretty much. That's kind of the issue here. Bumgarner is a guy that I typically like to pick on, but he, like I said, he's actually been good against left-handed bats this year. He's had a lot more issues with righties where he's allowed a 194 expected ISO. But if you start looking for right-handed power in this Texas lineup, you stop as soon as you get to Adolis Garcia. He's it. So it sets up as a good matchup for Bumgarner. Again, he's really expensive on DraftKings, so I think he'll be hard to get to, even though he's not getting much ownership. On FanDuel, he's really cheap, but the opportunity cost obviously is higher. But I really like the matchup in general for Bumgarner. Just not sure how much I'll get to for DFS purposes, but it makes it hard to get to Texas as well. Never going to talk anyone off of rostering Joey Gallo, regardless of the matchup. But individually, the only guy that I think actually looks good here is Adolis Garcia.
Alrighty. Anything else from this game before we move on?
Nope.
Alrighty, let's do this one more, and then we'll have three to go here. A lot to talk about in this one for sure. We've got White Sox 5.8 implied runs here. What is it? At minus 174 going up against the Royals, 10 total runs here, 95 degrees in Kansas City. Third straight game that they've played where it's just been ridiculous temperatures there in KC. Great hitting environment. Not going to be great for Kansas City hitting environment, considering they're facing Lucas Giolito for on the season, 35.8% hard to hit percentage, 364 expected slugging, and a 28.2% K percentage. I love this dude. I love the Chicago's starting rotation for the most part. Everybody 1 through 4 out of that grouping, outside of Dallas Keuchel, just cannot roster enough here. Lucas Giolito, how does he compare to the other guys on this slate for you?
Yeah, so the ownership jumped a bit for him, but again, it's still pretty relative. Like he's coming in a little bit behind Buehler. He's coming in about double Tyler Mahle. I think he's a good option. Like he's got I think second highest strikeout percentage. Yeah, he's got the second highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 28%, 3.83 xFIP. The only real issue you run into him is he has had power issues this year with 1.44 home runs per 9 allowed. But looking at his ISO numbers versus his expected ISO numbers, I think he's gotten pretty unlucky. He's allowed a 141 ISO to lefties and a 226 ISO to righties, but a 108 expected ISO to lefties and 177 to righties just suggests that he's gotten a little unlucky there. I do hesitate a little bit just because it looks like extremely favorable hitting conditions here. And I think that's reflected in the fact that Kansas City has a 4.5 implied run total and the White Sox are approaching 6. So a little hesitant there, and don't mind getting to some Kansas City stacks if you're playing large field, top heavy tournaments, just to kind of leverage against Giolito. But I do think it's a high upside spot for him. The strikeout stuff is there. The Royals aren't a particularly scary offense either. They don't strike out a ton. They're bottom 5 or bottom 6 in terms of strikeout percentage this year, but they're also towards the bottom of the league in WRC plus. So a pretty decent matchup for Giolito.
Yeah, I agree. And then on the other side, Kris Bubic, he does not miss bats. He walks a lot of guys. He gives up power. I mean, this is looking like the spot, the best spot, top stack potential, 13.4%. Ownership is already there. And if you click on the individual hitters over on Fantasy Cruncher, I mean, it gets a little nuts. And I knew it was going to get nuts on Eloy Jimenez, who's 2,800. And I'm curious to get your thoughts about him. But even Tim Anderson, 22%, Jose Abreu, 16.8%. And some of the worst hitters, Zavala and stuff, they're down there in the 9 hole. But like, do you really want to be rostering him? So it seems like everybody on the White Sox is going to be crazy owned. How are you handling their ownership today?
Yeah, I'm interested to see how this one shakes out for me because they are just getting so much ownership. But it's just, I think, easily the best spot on the slate when you factor in the weather and the fact that Bubic, he's coming off of a couple of good starts. Like someone pointed that out in YouTube chat this morning too. But he faced Baltimore and he faced Detroit. So I'm not getting too excited about this guy. He already showed that he could have success against minor league offenses when he was in the minor leagues. So not getting too excited about Bubic here going up against the White Sox, who have a lot of power from the right side. He's given up power to both sides of the plate this year. He's allowed a 212 expected ISO to righties, which is what's really important with this White Sox lineup, 240 expected ISO to lefties, but you have no lefties in this lineup. So they all look great, and you get a nice combination of expensive guys and value with Adam Engel hitting second at 3,500, Eloy Jimenez at 2,800 batting cleanup, Andrew Vaughan sixth at 2,800. They give you a lot of value. The problem is just that there's so much ownership going to this team. Andrew Vaughan is the best hitter that is coming in at sub 10%. Everyone 1 through 5 is between 13.5% for Adam Engel and 29% for Tim Anderson. Then you get Vaughan, Garcia, Mendick, and Zavala that are lower owned. The only one of those guys that I actually like is Andrew Vaughan, but obviously you can go to these other guys too if you're playing a lot of lineups. Typically for me, in smaller field tournaments, I'm more likely to get to the White Sox just because the raw number of teams that I'm going to have to beat that have White Sox stacks if they do well is just lower and more manageable. In your larger field stuff, the $8 100K to first on DraftKings, if the White Sox in aggregate are, let's call it, 10% owned, you still just have thousands of White Sox stacks that you have to beat and kind of just get lucky against with 3 or 4 players different. So the contest size matters to me. And then also, again, it's the ownership of your whole lineup that matters. So if I happen to get to, who did we mention? Like an Atlantic stack, for example, I might have a couple of those at 2% ownership. I'm more likely to just fill those in with White Sox bats because I think the White Sox are in the best spot and not many other people are playing teams like Atlanta or Kansas City or whoever. So it really just depends on what the rest of my lineup looks like, how willing I am to go to the White Sox.
Yeah, Eloy Jimenez is 2,800. He is way, way, way underpriced. Historically, the guy is just a masher. Crazy barrel rate last season. Everything about him just shows that he's mispriced, but he's also going to be 30+% owned. And the smaller you get in field and you go up in price, the more he's going to show up today. I mean, he was 2,500 yesterday, but he had 14 games. Today you have 10, and it's definitely going to go to more Jimenez. So just be cognizant of it. Let's move ourselves along to the Kansas City side. Anything really stick out to you here if you're going to get some leverage on a super owned pitcher here in this spot? I mean, Sal Perez is always viable, but anybody else you really want to get to here? The
price tag on Jorge Soler, I think, just gives you massive upside for the price. It's kind of like, not that he's as good a hitter as Jimenez, but he's got similar power, and the matchup obviously isn't as good. But if you're just talking like cheap sub 3K guys that clearly have the potential to hit 2 home runs in a game, because Soler's done it, I think, twice in the last 3. He's got that too, and everyone's going to go to Jimenez, whereas they're not going to go to Soler. So that's a very high upside tournament play, I think. I like going to him as leverage, even if you're not full stacking Kansas City. I like Soler as a one-off just because he's so cheap.
All righty. Let's talk for 1 second here about all of the great tools at Awesemo Plus, because they are the best in the industry. And I truly believe that as somebody who is a sub here, as somebody who has been using these tools for years. They keep getting better and better and better. And now you have access to them for $29.95 per week. That includes full access to everything that we have here. You want to get involved in the MMA product that is just second to none as well. Somebody like Adam or myself who know nothing about MMA, we can use the Top Fires tool and figure out everything that we need to on any given slate. Using that alongside player projections, ownership projections, premium Slack, lineup builder, and so much more. Awesemo Plus Platinum right now, MLB Deeper Dive, all caps, one word. Definitely use that. It makes me look kind of good too. So if you like me, use that promo code when you sign up. MLB Deeper Dive, all caps, one word, to get 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. And of course, if you're only looking to play MLB DFS, then you can sign up using Awesemo Plus MLB Weekly Package for only $15.95. Stop guessing, start winning. All righty. We got 2 to go here. Colorado plus 185 going into LA. This is all about Heaney. Heaney. Had to. It's always great. He's going crazy high owned now. Nearly 50% here. 43% ownership right now. Only an 18.9% top 2 pitcher percentage. Of course, the strikeouts can be there, but so much so too can be the power going up against him. I have no idea how to handle him today. How are you?
I'm probably going to just play a lot because So he has the 3rd highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 27.9%. He's a good pitcher overall. He only walks 7.5% of hitters. He's got a 3.83 xFIP. The only real issue Andrew Heaney has is that while he strikes out 31% of right-handed hitters, he also gives up a lot of power with that's Chichi Gonzalez, which is even worse, with a 197 expected ISO allowed to righties. So you get spots a lot of the time with Andrew Heaney where it's a really big boom or bust spot because he strikes out nearly 1/3 of the right-handed hitters he faces, but he also gives up a lot of power. That's not really the case here because the Rockies have virtually no right-handed power. They have Trevor Story. They might have CJ Cron. He may or may not be in the lineup. Brendan Rodgers maybe has some power, but like outside of that, there's just nothing you're really concerned about as far as right-handed power goes. So like, is he capable of having a bad start? Obviously, but it just sets up as such a good matchup for him in terms of being able to get strikeouts, being one of the best strikeout pitchers on the slate, being an overall good pitcher who just has trouble with home runs, but then facing a team that really does not have the power to take advantage of that unless Heaney is just, absolutely at the bottom of his game. So he's getting a lot of ownership, but he's in a price tier by himself where I don't really think there's comparable options. You look at what's around him at his salary, he's 7,400 on DraftKings. Michael Wacha, 7,900 against the Yankees. Even without getting into the fact that the Yankees are more dangerous than the Rockies, you're going from a 28% strikeout percentage to a 20% strikeout percentage. It's just there's nothing around him in terms of salary that is remotely comparable to the upside that Andrew Heaney gives you.
Colorado's obviously better against left-handed pitching on the season. They only strike out at an underneath 21% clip. It's kind of jarring to see them the second best in terms of avoiding strikeouts there next to Houston. That's strange, but still in 90 WRC plus. And Heaney has good enough stuff that I'm not concerned with this projected lineup whatsoever. I'm siding with you. I think that's kind of what I want to do. I haven't really decided yet. He just provides so much savings at 7,400. There's nothing else that I feel remotely comfortable or viable down here in this range. So yeah, I think I'm probably with you on Heaney and just kind of jamming him, living with the result of that. But on the other side of this, as you said, Chichi is just not a very good pitcher. All these guys can kind of go into the same bucket. They're all righties that seem to, for this pitching staff, with the exception of Marquez, they give up some hard contact, but they generally keep the ball in the yard. Chichi Gonzalez is kind of the outlier there where it gets up in the air, 12.1 degree launch angle, 539 expected slugging. We're seeing the ownership come in here for the Angels, but I still don't mind getting to them because I know the bats I want to get to. How about you?
Yeah, I like the Angels here. They're getting some ownership, but it's also just kind of skewed upwards by Shohei Ohtani getting 29% ownership on DraftKings. The next closest guy is Upton at like 13%. We don't have the lineup yet either. Jared Walsh may or may not be in it. Hopefully he is, because he just makes the lineup better. But the point here is that the aggregate ownership is a little bit deceiving because Ohtani's just getting so much individually. Chichi Gonzalez gives up plenty of power. 305 expected ISO against righties, 161 to lefties. Doesn't strike out basically anyone. So you're going to let Ohtani and potentially Jared Walsh put the ball in play with all the power they have. And then Gonzalez, just gives it up to righties. So you have Fletcher, Upton, Iglesias, not a great hitter, but he's a shortstop, and that position's pretty tough to fill. Brandon Marsh hasn't gotten off to a great start in the majors, but he's cheap. Max Stassi has some power for a catcher. The Angels have one of the highest implied run totals on the slate as well, so I do really like them here. And one other thing to mention with you mentioned the Rocky strikeout numbers against lefties. I don't have it. I don't have it sorted by away and versus lefties, but at home in general this year, they have a sub 20% strikeout percentage. On the road, they're at like 25.5%.
Oh, shit. Okay. So that's important to note for sure.
Which just like normally I don't care much about home road splits, but when you're talking about hitting in and out of fours, it makes a difference, I think.
Right. And of course, you look at some of the power that exists. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, the ball isn't going to be curving as much too. If you're not capable of hitting any kind of breaking pitches as well, that can definitely minimize it at home as opposed to on the road where you cannot, especially at sea level here for LA and Anaheim. So yeah, I think that Andrew Heaney, definitely a great spot, but Colorado stacks coming in very low owned here in this spot, 4% top stack potential, 1.8% ownership share. Do you have any interest whatsoever in going to a team that just put up double-digit runs yesterday?
Large field tournaments, yeah. I don't anticipate getting to the Rockies in 3-max, but they do check a couple of the boxes, even though they are a really bad offense. I talk a lot about wanting teams that are either at the top of the top stack tool, going under-owned in terms of their top stack percentage versus their ownership, and or facing a popular pitcher. The Rockies do check off 2 of those 3. They're not towards the top of the top stack pool, but they are actually in the middle. They're going under-owned with about 2% ownership and a 4% chance of being a top stack. And then the big one is that Andrew Heaney is likely to be the most popular pitcher on the slate at 43% right now. So I don't think it's a very likely spot. If I had to pick one side here, like in 3-max, I'm probably just going to go to Heaney. But in those larger field where you have to really be different typically to win, or just get really lucky, but you're going to make more money by playing more contrarian. I do think the Rockies have some value here. They will look a lot better also if CJ Cron's in the lineup.
All right, let's round it out. We got the Dodgers. We've got the San Francisco Giants. NL West matchup here, minus 123 for the Dodgers. 7.5 total runs here in this game. Very, very low here, but of course it's being played in San Francisco, so that makes sense. Walker Buehler coming in as the other guy. You talk about on one side you have Heaney. It's going to be Heaney and Buehler and Heaney for both of for pretty much this entire slate. They both kind of stick out 1-2. Don't write off Desclafani, but let's start with Walker Buehler here.
I think it's a good spot. The offense isn't the Giants offense isn't a great matchup. We just got the lineup. It's missing something. I don't know. It's weaker towards the bottom, but there's no Lamont Wade.
Yeah.
So it's Yastrzemski, Posey, Dickerson.
So that's
Flores.
one home run gone.
Right.
So that's
Yastrzemski, Posey, Dickerson, Flores, Duggar, Ruff, Bosler, Estrada, pitcher spot. Seems like maybe they're missing 2 guys, but definitely missing Wade. But still, it's been an above average offense all season long. But you're getting them in San Francisco. The weather is cool. The park is great for pitching. Walker Buehler is now probably the best pitcher on the slate now that Zach Wheeler is gone. In terms of strikeout percentage, he's not at the top, but still a healthy 26.5% strikeout rate. Doesn't walk guys. 3.62 xFIP. Just a very, very good pitcher. I think he's deserving of the ownership he gets, and I have no issue getting to it.
And Desclafani, I feel like his strikeout percentage had been higher earlier in the season. It's down to 23.5%. Maybe I was just looking at it wrong, but I mean, that's still decent enough. I don't really mind that. Problem is going up against this Dodgers team. You don't really want to be picking on them, but it's a great ballpark. Any shots whatsoever on Desclafani today?
Yeah, if you're playing 150, I would expect to get to a little bit of Desclafani. Not someone that I expect to prioritize. He's kind of in that same boat as like Bumgarner. It's obviously a different spot, but they're a little bit overpriced for what I want. Desclafani, I think, has better strikeout stuff than Bumgarner, but Bumgarner's got the better matchup. But just 2 similar guys where I think individually they're a little bit under-owned, but in terms of actually making lineups, I still doubt that I get to too much of them. Desclafani is better against righties. His biggest issue is that he gives up power to lefties, and the Dodgers most likely will just have Muncy and Bellinger as far as scary left-handed bats. Muncy obviously more so than Bellinger. Matt Beaty and Billy McKinney not as much of a concern. So I think it's an okay spot. The Dodgers only have a 4 implied run total. The game is in San Francisco, so all of the things that work in Buehler's favor as far as the environment work for DeSclafani as well, obviously. So I still think he's okay in tournaments, but just doubt that I take a huge stand on him.
Yeah, probably going to be around the 10% number that he's at here. Dodgers, you talked a little bit about the lefty bats. That's kind of who you're isolating out of there. Probably don't want to play Chris Taylor at 5.6K here. But San Francisco, 3.6 implied run total. Walker Buehler maybe getting some leverage there. Mike Yastrzemski is basically viable in every matchup. Alex Dickerson's 2.9K. But anything else really stick out to you here from bats on either side?
Not really. I mean, I think Buehler's really good. I don't think he's as volatile as Heaney. Like, for example, I think the Giants are a better offense than the Rockies. And I intend to play a lot of Andrew Heaney, but I think Andrew Heaney is a more volatile pitcher than Buehler. So like if I'm just looking to target one of the popular pitchers, I'm more likely to go up against Andrew Heaney than I am against Walker Buehler, especially when you consider this game being in San Francisco. Like you said, Yastrzemski is always viable. Alex Dickerson's cheap, but Walker Buehler is just a really good pitcher that's pretty unlikely to really give it up here.
All right, we covered all 11 games. We're down to 10 here. I want to finish out. We have a super chat here from Rosso Music. Ohtani over under 9 fantasy points and Winker over under 8.5. Assuming that's FanDuel based on the questioning of it, but maybe not.
Yeah, so assuming FanDuel, we have Ohtani at 16. We have Winker at 13. So
okay. So then I guess it would be DraftKings probably the right way of looking at that. I would probably be taking over on both of them if I'm looking at
Ohtani on DraftKings is at 12, Winker's at 10, so still would be leaning over.
Yeah, love the over on that as well. But yep, 10 total games here. We covered them all here for you. Right after us, don't go anywhere. We've got Craig, we've got Josh, we got both of them coming up here to take you guys all the way up to lock. Looking forward to that. Definitely be tuning in for that. But otherwise, he's Adam. I'm Eric. Thank you so much to Jock Market. We're out of here.
Over. Did you kill it? Okay, yeah.
No, he didn't. It owns his apartment. It owns his apartment now. Yeah.
You're lucky he lets you keep working there. I can do this all day too. And we are live. Welcome to MLB Live Before Lock. It is Wednesday, I think, July 28th. Is it Wednesday? It is Wednesday. Wednesday, July 28th. I am Josh Engleman. I am joined by Greg Ehrenberg, and we are here to break down a 10-game slate now. We dropped a game, 9 games on FanDuel, I believe, if I'm getting that correct. I think that I am. But hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, notification bell, all that good stuff. We're at 111 likes. We could run that number up pretty dramatically right out of the gate. Shout out to JockMKT for being the presenting sponsor. But let's start here. Greg, how are you?
Yeah, pretty good. I mean, had to rerun pretty much everything because unlike other sports, for baseball, when one game gets canceled, all of a sudden that changes the top stack odds for everything. It changes pitchers' odds to be top scoring team. It's not like basketball where it's like, oh, whatever, this game isn't happening. We just take all the players out of the player pool. You literally have to rebuild everything once a game gets canceled. So, we have the Phillies-Nationals game was canceled due to COVID. And then we also have the doubleheader game between the Yankees and Red Sox that is on the DraftKings slate, but not on FanDuel.
It's wild stuff, man. Totally wild stuff. Yeah, like especially when you lose a game, sometimes it really doesn't matter. Like the hitters weren't all that owned, the pitchers weren't all that owned. There's not a ton changing. Not so fast when Zach Wheeler gets yanked out of there at, I don't know what he was last run, 40% or something like that. The change then becomes pretty dramatic. And I'm seeing it in my new data. So I'm excited to talk about it. Yeah,
and it's also made pitching really tricky now because this was not a deep pitching slate. And now all of a sudden we've got, and also I'm going to be updating our ownership a lot during the show, just see if anything really changes dramatically because, obviously with the pitcher getting rolled up, but we have on DraftKings now, Andrew Heaney's going to be nearly 50% of the field's lineups. Over on FanDuel, Heaney, a little more reasonable because it's a single pitcher site, but still he's going to be a quarter of the field's lineups. But, it creates a lot of interesting decisions when you have somebody like Heaney, who isn't a particularly good pitcher, that's going to be in 50% of lineups.
It does indeed. And thank you for transitioning me directly into who are your top pitchers for today? That is the question we are starting with. So that was a perfect intro for me.
So right now, my build, which by the way, finished doing, good thing that, usually I like to bust Eric's balls a little bit when he runs long with the deeper dive, but not today because my lineups, I actually needed that extra time to update. So I do have a final run of my lineups. Right now, it is, by the way, pitchers who I like Walker Buehler. He's my most rostered pitcher. My second most rostered pitcher right now is Lucas Giolito. And I've had all kinds of concerns about Giolito over the last month, but, just given some of the other options we have on the slate, that's just kind of where I landed on my two most rostered pitchers. I have Heaney in there is in a lot of my lineups, but I just can't get anywhere near the field on him. And then I have some more contrarian guys I'm after also. But on the high end, I never find it to be all that problematic to spend up for pitching. And I'm landing on a lot of Walker and Giolito.
Walker and Giolito, my two top on DraftKings. I have Walker by a very, very minimal hair. They were basically coin flips coming out of my crunch. Actually, the Giants lineup moved Walker Buehler ahead of Luke Giolito when I ran the crunch. He was slightly behind. Now he's slightly ahead. So I don't have anything to add to that. It was minuscule one way or the other. Not getting to Tyler Mahle, however, at 10-2. Is he a guy that's just going to slip through the cracks for you, given his price tag?
I have him in lineups, but not a significant portion. I have him at 10%. And one of the things with Tyler Mahle is there's a few different ways that we could break him down. First of all, he does have strikeout upside. And if you do look at our top, our prop tool today for pitchers, I'm pretty sure last I looked, and I'll bring this back up, he is actually one of the better bets that we have right now. He is over 6.5 strikeouts is plus money, depending what book you look at. So there's a little bit of strikeout upside. But to your point, the price tag is a little bit problematic. And his walks have been so high recently that's inhibiting his ability to go deep into games. And it's also stunted his fantasy production a little bit. So over the last few weeks now, these are his fantasy scores for DraftKings scoring. 12, 12, 14, 18, 15, 14. The strikeouts are still there, but he's giving up a lot of runs. He's walking a lot of guys. So I have him in 10% of my lineup. It's going to be a little bit underweight to the field solely because of the strikeout upside. But I would probably have 0% if we still Wheeler as an option.
Okay. Then here's my next question for you. And we're sort of looking in this $8,500 to $9,500 range. Bumgarner, McGill, DeSclafani, Fried. Fried pulling a ton of ownership, 25%. McGill, 19%. And then you get down in the single digits. DeSclafani at 8.5, Madison Bumgarner at 5. I see all four of those guys as relatively equal. Like I've got it 12, 13, 16, 16 instead of that big range that we just saw across all four. How are you breaking down that area where it seems like some guys are slipping through the cracks and some are pulling a little bit more? Based on our top stacks tool, those guys are all in pretty similar spots for top 2 pitcher odds.
So give me, what was the price range again?
9,500 to 8,500. Bumgarner, McGill, Desclafani, and Fried. They're pretty close to each other in the top pitchers tool, but obviously very different in ownership.
Yeah, so it's also weird in terms of like, I think Bumgarner is terrible at this point in his career. So just from a mental standpoint, it's hard for me to get to him. If you look at Bumgarner, also his fantasy production as of late, we could talk about the matchup also because the matchup is going to be pertinent. But here is his fantasy outcomes over the last month now. He had one game where he scored over 20 fantasy points against the Cubs. That is the only game he scored over 10 fantasy points since May 11th. And he's had some, fairly easy matchups in there. He's faced the Pirates. He's faced the Mets when the Mets lineup was banged up and he gave up 5 runs in 2 innings and got pulled. He faced the Cardinals lineup. He scored negative fantasy points against them. He faced the Rockies, though that was in Colorado. Like on the whole, Bumgarner has just not been very good this year. If we're trying to look at some sort of positives, he has had an uptick in velocity this year from last year. Because he was a guy, he was in a motorcycle accident and then came back with greatly diminished velocity. It seemed like that was something that was never going to come back. It's still down over the course of his career, 90.9 miles per hour average fastball velocity this year, but it was 88.3 last year. So it's gone up a little bit, but still well below his career average. So, Bumgarner's numbers overall for the year, 5.09 ERA, 4.44 expected ERA. The strikeout stuff hasn't been good at 22.8%. I get that he's going really low owned, but it's really hard for me to roster somebody who's expensive that I also just think is terrible.
That's fair. I think that's reasonable. It's not like I have a huge stand on him, but he does appear to have some leverage as a pitcher. I would be a little bit lighter on the Fried 25% ownership, which was sort of what I was looking at most of all, and just mixing and matching the guys in that group. Ultimately, whoever showed up for me, I'd be cool with. But I worry a lot less about leverage at pitcher than I do at hitter.
So the guy who I have the most of those 3 names you mentioned is actually Tyler McGill, who's a little bit of an unknown, especially because we don't have minor league data from last year, which really throws a monkey wrench into all of this because Tyler McGill was not a guy who was really a well-regarded prospect coming into the big leagues. He's 26 years old, but he's had outstanding results so far. It's only 6 major league outings, but he's a 2.1 ERA, 2.16 expected ERA. The strikeout stuff has been really solid, 27% K rate. Then you look at his minor league numbers, and we just don't have recent data to go back on. So you go back a couple of years ago, or even this year, his limited minor league outings weren't really all that great. But, you go back to 2019, where he had a 4.04 ERA in A-ball. He had a 5.4 ERA in AA. But there's no 2020 data. So did he make a really big leap? Is this a small sample size? It's really hard to know without any information at all from last year. I kind of think the unknown is a positive for him here, just because I'm pretty confident Madison Bumgarner is not good at this point in his career. Max Fried, I think he's fine, but once again, he's not a guy who has all that much strikeout upside. So I just look at Tyler McGill and say, like, okay, I think at a worst case scenario, he's probably equal to these guys. So with that in mind, I like getting to McGill the most of these guys. I have him right now in about 20% of my lineups, which is more than I have of Fried or Bumgarner.
McGill and Fried both came out of my sim at 16%, so we're pretty much in lockstep there. If we wanted to look at value pitchers, there's one obvious one, Andrew Heaney, pulling 44% ownership. I don't really have much else to add. He's clearly owned for a reason and should be. I don't know if you have a bigger take on whether you're trying to get under or over, but it's certainly not surprising ownership.
No, I'm under on him, and it's only because of the ownership. Like, he's clearly the best play in the mid-range from a fantasy perspective, but once again, he's not a good pitcher. He's a very good fantasy pitcher because the way he gets outs is by strikeouts, and he also has a really good matchup. The Rockies offense is miserable away from Coors Field. They've had the worst WRC plus on the road almost every single year over the last 8 years or something like that. But if you just look at Heaney's numbers, 5.32 ERA, 4.2 expected ERA, that's not all that great. It's just the 28% K rate and the plus strikeout stuff. So Heaney is my 3rd most rostered pitcher today, behind Giolito and Buehler, just kind of by default. But I'm still underweight to the field on him because the field has been nearly 50% of lineups. And for that reason, the Rockies are uncomfortably my most rostered stack, which we'll talk about later, just solely for leverage purposes. Because if I think Heaney's going this wildly overowned, I want to be able to take advantage of it somehow. I don't think it's going to work out more often than not, But I think just looking at the ownership, it's something that would work out more often than not over the long run.
So who else are you looking at as a potential value pitcher? We've got Tanner Houck at 14%, and then nobody else. Nobody else is pulling any ownership. I would be okay having mild shares of Jordan Lyles or Jorge Lopez. I'm not trying to advocate for them in any sort of aggressive manner, but if the options are everybody is zero, like basically below Heaney, if you give me 5 of Lyles and 5 of Lopez, that is okay with me. No part below Heaney, though, really makes me feel good.
I don't feel, it's funny because the last time we did a baseball show, which was about the only other time we did a baseball show together, it was also live before lock, and we talked about crappy value pitchers. We liked one of them was Jordan Lyles, and the other was Matt Manning at the time, and neither one of them had any ownership, and they're both okay that day. I think Lyles ended up scoring like
Manning
14.
Was really good that day.
Yeah, I mean, for a fantasy perspective, for him and for his price tag, he ended up being a very good play. I like Jordan Lyles again today, and I like Jorge Lopez. So we're kind of on the same page with these cheap guys. We could talk about, and by the way, like is relative. I have them both. Yeah. It's actually really similar ownership to what I had that same day with those guys. They're both guys I have in like the low teens in terms of ownership from me right now. So
they should have been 8 and 9%ers for me. So I don't mind getting to like 11 or 12.
Yeah, it's 13 and 14% for me.
There we go.
But either way, so with Jorge Lopez, his results this year have been no good. So we kind of throw that away. But this is not a good pitching slate, number one, which is a very similar situation we had the other day. There's limited options, and I'm looking at the cheap guys and say, okay, of these guys, who could I find reason to think that these could be better plays than just the other guys in the price range? And for me, we're looking at Jorge Lopez. The main thing, he's going up against the Marlins team that's just tearing everything down at this point. They traded away their best hitter earlier in the day, Starling Marte, to the Oakland A's. So number one, that already creates an easier matchup for him. And just from a pricing perspective, right? Think of it, it's not quite the same apples to apples comparison, but if you're comparing it to basketball, it's all of a sudden a guy like, hey, we could project for a little extra usage or something like that, because he's no longer facing one of the best hitters in the Marlins lineup. Jorge Lopez, 5,300 on D. I wouldn't consider it all on FanDuel. I have to mention that also. But for DK at 5,300, he is facing a weak Marlins offense that's now getting weaker because they lost their best hitter. And that's kind of all the logic there is to it.
Are there any other pitchers you want to touch on? From a FanDuel perspective, Buehler, Giolito, Heaney, they're the 3 guys that I'm going to be looking to most. I don't really have any hot takes on anybody else there, but do you have any other pitching takes that you want to get in?
We could talk about Jordan Lyles also, because it's a relatively hot take to have a double-digit exposure to him. But, you look at his results this year actually haven't been that bad. And his recent fantasy outings, 14 fantasy points, -3 in Toronto. Not in Toronto, in Buffalo against the Rays, but 15, 21, 21, 12. Really almost any of those outcomes I'd actually be pretty happy with relative to the other options on the slate and his price point. And Jordan Lyles for the year, his numbers are not good at all, except they have been better over the last month, which is something that's maybe a little bit encouraging. So I don't know. He has a positive matchup. The other pitching options suck, and that's really why I'm on him. Like there's no real crazy positive benefit to him. He's pitched pretty well in 5 of his last 4 starts.
I do love that you told me that you had those guys in the low teens, and my immediate response was 11 and 12, the 2 numbers that weren't in the teens. Bothers me a lot that I didn't just say like 13 and 14 immediately, like how obvious it was. Oh God. Anyway, anything else for pitching?
There's nobody else I really have any real exposure to. There's some guys just pop up in like 1% of lineups because they make sense. But did you roster Tanner Houck at all?
No, came up in my Sims at about 5%. Current ownership at 14% makes it just straight no-go for me. The 14% that's going there is just going to go to Lyles and Lopez.
Yeah, I didn't roster him either. I'm a little nervous about that just because he's produced good major league results so far. We've only seen him throw 18 innings, but he's a 2.5 ERA, 2.79 expected ERA, good strikeout stuff. I understand why people are getting there just relative to the other pitching options on the slate. But given that there's also a decent amount of ownership projected going there, and it's a brutal matchup. He's pitching against the Toronto Blue Jays, one of the best offenses in baseball. That, and I have some concerns about how deep he's going to be allowed to work into the games because his last 3 outings, 4 1/3 innings, 3 innings, 4 2/3 innings. I get that he's pitched really well from a strikeout perspective and an earned runs perspective, but a couple of things. Number one, I don't know that he's going to be allowed to work deeper than that into the game. Number two is also the matchup. But then also is, this is a doubleheader. Maybe they're going to be, there isn't a need to push him to go 3 or 4 innings or anything like that. So I don't know. The price has gone up here. If he was at like 4K and if he wasn't picking up ownership, I'd consider him. But all things considered, I'd rather just go to somebody like Jorge Lopez for 2K cheaper.
Same. I gave him 4 2/3 innings, and that's what's spitting out for me. It is everything. And just in case anybody's curious, yes, everything is adjusted for the fact that he has an increased chance to throw a complete game, which he won't. Higher chance of picking up a pitcher win, which he, based on my estimation, probably won't all that frequently. Not much of a change as far as I'm concerned. Schedule for the rest of the night. There is a show coming up after this, I think. Did I read that right? Now I'm starting to doubt myself. Yeah, I am right. I can't keep track of the days anymore, man. I'm already in vacation mode. 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. Basically immediately following this, we're talking like 25 minutes, the MMA strategy show. Jason Floyd, Pete the Heat Rogers, breaking it all down for this Saturday's UFC card. Plus, if you're looking for free content, I know Jordan had it on the screen a little earlier. MLB main slate ownership is free. That should help you out a ton, especially with the way the slate has changed throughout the day. Going to help you out to have that updated information. And if you're looking to golf, PGA Top Golfers tool is free as well. Let's move on to the hitting. Who are your favorite stacks for today?
Yeah, so I kind of teased it a little bit before, but my most rostered stack today, for no reason other than leverage purposes, is the Colorado Rockies. There's so much ownership going to not to Lucas Giolito. I mean, there is to Giolito also, but there's so much ownership going to Andrew Heaney. That makes sense, but the number that we have it projected for isn't totally warranted, right? There's just a cutoff point where you have to say this player's getting too much ownership. And if you look at our top pitchers tool, we do have Heaney projected as one of the best pitchers on the slate, but here's what that equates to. We have him projected for 44% ownership, but a 19% chance to be one of the top 2 scoring pitchers on the slate and a 22% chance to be one of the top 2 values on the slate. And, I understand why people are getting Heaney. If you're playing cash games, play Heaney. Right? Strikeout upside, really good spot, but he's almost double his warranted ownership according to our tools. And with that in mind, I just think it's a really good leverage spot to go to the Rockies. We do have them going a little bit under owned. Plus, you're getting really good leverage off of Heaney. These are the spots that I've really liked to attack for MLB DFS, and it's always boomer bust spots. Like my night is almost going to entirely be made up by what the Rockies do against Andrew Heaney. If Andrew Heaney goes and scores 40 or 30 fantasy points, I'm not going to win tonight unless I just happen to have the nuts in one of my Andrew Heaney lineups. This is just how I build lineups generally in MLB DFS. I see an under-owned offense going up against an over-owned pitcher, and not a good over-owned pitcher, right? It's not like this is Walker Buehler projecting for 50% ownership. Like that might be a spot where I don't want to stack the Giants against him. But he needs a 5.32 ERA this year. He gets hit really hard. He gives up a lot of fly balls. He gives up a lot of home runs. There is significant upside in the Rockies offense in this spot, as bad as they are. Because Andrew Heaney, in some of his recent starts, soon got 2 home runs, 3 home runs, 1 home run. He's clearly the best pitching value option on the board. It's just too much ownership going to him.
So I have the Rockies 13th, but they are my 3rd favorite leverage stack. The problem is I've got a team that I have ranked higher than the Rockies with an even bigger leverage score based on everything that I've got. I am looking closer at the Rays. I don't know if you've dipped your toe into the Rays waters. They're pretty expensive today on DK, but I think there's enough value, especially with the idea of needing to use Heaney in that sort of lineup. It makes it a little bit easier for me to get to the Rays. And it just doesn't appear that having Heaney with the Rays is something anybody else is doing. Margot and Franco are at 3 and 4.5%. Everybody else is at 1 or below. So it's an unowned team as far as I'm concerned. I do have them as a little bit more likely to succeed today. So the Rays would be the Rays are my version of your Rockies.
They're my second most rostered offense today. So no real concern. Yeah, nothing I'm really going to argue against you here. Just for me, and we're kind of splitting hairs here, right? Because it's still my second most rostered offense. The only reason I'm so heavy on the Rockies today is because of Heaney ownership. Like there isn't just the way that I go through my process and figure out my ownership for stacks. Number one part of it is definitely going to be just our top stacks tool and comparing the ownership odds compared to the top stack odds. But then number 2 for me also weighs in some of the pitcher ownership and which spots I'm looking to get leverage. So that bumps up the Rockies a little bit higher, but still raised my second most rostered offense. Like you said, there's just no ownership going here for a team that overall has A good offense, the matchup against Nestor Cortes. I don't mind it. Cortes has had some success this year, but I don't really buy into it at all. It's kind of a lot of goofy stuff he does on the mound where it's a lot of, it's kind of like the Johnny Cueto stuff where it's like stop and start and trying to throw off hitters' timings and stuff because he does not have good stuff. Average fastball velocity only 90.6 miles per hour this year. The underlying numbers for him, they still look okay, but he has a 266 BABIP. He only has a 3.8% home run to fly ball rate. Some of his minor league numbers were not good in the past, even in the major leagues. And previous times he's been up at the big league level, he hasn't found success. 2020, he only pitched 7 innings, but he had a 15.26 ERA. 2019, he pitched 66 innings at a 5.67 ERA. Then you go back to 2018, 7.71 ERA. So he's been good this year, but there's no track record of this kind of success for him and just low ownership on the Rays. Also a lot of low price in there. So I do like Tampa Bay.
How are you handling these high-end stacks that are pulling a ton of ownership? White Sox, Reds, Brewers. What are you doing in that regard? We've got the White Sox at the top of the top stack tool, and it's not particularly close, but they are projecting to be mildly overowned. Same for Cincinnati, second. Same for Milwaukee, third. All three of those teams pulling more ownership than their odds of being the top stack. How are you managing it?
So the Chicago White Sox, who let me refresh this to make sure it's still the case. At least while we were entering the show, they were the most overowned stack on the entire slate, according to our top stack tool. However, a lot of that, and yeah, it still looks like they're pretty wild. Well, not wildly overowned relative to some other slates, but 16% projected ownership share, 12.6% chance of being a top stack for Chicago right now. But this is kind of twofold, right? Number one, it's a good spot for them. Number two, the ownership is really driven by individual hitters. So if you go into Chicago and look at the ownership for each individual guy, a lot of it's because we have Eloy Jimenez, who I think is the best individual hitter just on like a points per dollar perspective, but he's projected for 28% ownership. Then we have Tim Anderson projected for 27% ownership. So I think there are ways to stack the White Sox and just make it really different. Either leave off Eloy, leave off Tim Anderson, maybe leave off both. Because I do think it's a good spot for the offense. I just think there's a lot of ownership going to those two guys. I've rostered Eloy a lot as a one-off, but I did try to make White Sox stacks where I just don't have either of them in, and that gives me a lot different look than what the field has.
Yeah, I'm a little bit lighter on the White Sox, but I do think if I'm going to be cutting a team fully out of this top section, it's more likely for me to be the Brewers. I have them a little bit lower just in a general rank. Like I have the White Sox as my number one overall stack, just ignoring any ownership. I have the Brewers fourth, but I have them comparably overowned. So I'm going to lose the team at the bottom before I lose the team at the top. So the Brewers are the team that I'm going to be giving the biggest haircut right now.
Yeah, that's totally makes sense to me. And then also talking about the White Sox, like what'd you do individually with Eloy as a hitter? Because he's somebody who's been kind of difficult for me to manage lately, just because there's obviously a lot of variance in any hitter in baseball, right? They're only going to be up 4 or 5 times a game, but he's so wildly underpriced compared to what his actual talent level is. So if you go back to last year when Eloy was healthy, he's missed almost the entire season to this point because of a torn pectoral muscle. So we've only seen him play in 2 games so far this year. He did homer yesterday. However, if you go back to his pricing from last year, he was priced as high as 6,700 in the final month of last season. He spent almost the entirety of the last 6 weeks of last season priced like 4,800 to the mid 5K range and above. He's considered one of the best young players in baseball. I think the price is so just off on him that it's hard for him to not pop up in a meaningful amount of my lineup. So that's been a struggle for me. How are you handling him?
Just one quick note. Aaron Judge has been scratched from the Yankees lineup. So if you have Judge in a lineup, you might want to go ahead and fix it. Where do you think he's off to?
The injured list where he spent the majority of his career.
Yeah, obviously I don't expect Aaron Judge to be getting shipped out right now. How am I handling Eloy? I'm massively under the field. It's just not a spot that I'll ever in baseball be hanging around with. No, I mean, like the price is clearly fantastic. He profiles well. You're probably playing him in a cash game scenario. I find him hard to get to aggressively with the White Sox. It's just easier to grab some, like, these guys are not comparable. I would just rather have Andrew Vaughan at 10% ownership and flip-flop their ownership and take my chances because baseball's just different that way.
Yeah, I still have him a decent amount as a one-off. I'm going to be a little light on the field on him, but still, I mean, getting to him at like 20%, that still makes him one of my more rostered hitters, just not quite as much as the field.
Any value stacks, anybody else you're getting to? It's hard for me to ask this question considering how heavy you are on the Rockies and the Rays right now, two teams that aren't really pulling a ton of ownership. Are there any teams you're aggressively fading, or are there any more teams like the Rockies and Rays where you're taking a pretty big stand over the field?
Well, now I have to lower some of my Yankees stacks. One sec. I wanna circle back on pitching for a second now. Now that Aaron Judge is out, are you going to get to any shares of Michael Wacha?
I can't imagine I do, but I'll let you know.
Let's see. Michael Wacha. Yeah, he's been pretty bad this year. I'm just trying to see if I could justify it all, just because, it's always like there's no longer Aaron Judge in the lineup. This is a way easier matchup for Michael Wacha, but oh no, his numbers are much worse than I even thought off the top of my head. He was in 0% of my lineups. It would be lower if I could, but 5.16 ERA, 6.07 expected ERA, strikeout stuff isn't there for him. So never mind. And he's somewhat expensive, which is weird at 7,900 on DK. But
I'll give you the answer right now of what my change is for Wacha just by making that change in the lineup. Who the hell do they play? The Rays. Yeah, obviously I knew that. All right. If I look at Wacha right now, I have him projected for 12.43 DK points. I'm updating the lineup. I go back to Wacha. I have Wacha at, God, I should highlight these columns. This would be so much easier to see. 13.10. So he went up like 0.7 of a point by taking Aaron Judge out. So for people that want context or anything like that, like that's the extent of Aaron Judge getting replaced by, I don't even know. I didn't even pay attention to see who is in for him now. It's about 0.7 of a point for me. So I don't know. Are you now getting to Wacha?
No. If he was, because he was just somebody who I didn't even know off the top of my head what his price was, and he just didn't pop up in any of my lineups. So it was just something I was kind of considering, because when the Aaron Judge news came out, it was just something like, hey, just circle a basis, talk about him. And then as I saw him really quick and looked up his numbers, like, oh, there's no chance I would get to him. But before I wasn't, until I really looked into it, I wasn't sure, because obviously it becomes an easier matchup without Judge. But no, I will be 0% Wacha. But I have to take Aaron Judge out of lineups now. Not that I had that much of them, but he was in some of them.
Any other big stands on stacks for today? Or either way, positive or negative?
Let's see. So looking at my stack ownership, we talked about the Rays, talked about the Rockies. Those are my two most rostered offenses. The Mets are another team that's popping up for me a little bit, at least more than what the field has. So we talked about Max Fried before. He's another guy who we talk about, a pitcher who in that price range that you gave me before, we were talking about guys in the, it was like 9,400 to 8,500 price range. And we brought up Max Fried, and both of us agree that we're going to be underweight to the field on Fried. If you look at his numbers this year, he was great last year, just hasn't been this year. He's been a mediocre to below average pitcher, 4.46 ERA, 4.38 expected ERA. The strikeout numbers, 23.3%. By all means, this is a very middle of the road pitcher who has a somewhat tough matchup against the Mets. And I like the leverage that I'm getting there by, number one, the Mets look underowned, and Max Fried himself looks overowned. So like I said before, when I was talking about the Rockies, these are generally the spots I kind of like to target. I don't feel super great about the Mets. We only have them projected with a 2.2% chance to be a top stack of the day, but sub 1% ownership on a team like the Mets against what I don't consider to be all that tough of a matchup, I think that's sensible.
Can you think of any other stacks or teams that you want to touch on that you might not have gotten to talk about yet?
There's a lot of teams that are just kind of middle of the road for me, where it's, a lot of times on like these 10, 11 game baseball slates, I end up with a lot of teams who are like in 4% of lineups. Let's see. We could talk about the Cubs a little bit. I'm slightly overweight to them. Tyler Mahle. We talked about him before and how, he's really expensive today for DFS purposes. He has strikeout stuff, but he has struggled as of late. And I think the biggest issue has just been, he's one of the guys who really seems impacted by the spin rate stuff. So I'm going to pull up his Baseball Savant page and just talk about some of the spin rates in recent starts. But Tyler Mahle's numbers for the year, they look good. 3.92 ERA, 3.73 expected ERA. But if you're to sort his numbers post pitcher substance crackdown prior to before, he's been vastly different pitcher. So, in July, 4.64 ERA, June, 4.34. He was really good in March and April, with a 1.75 ERA. That's kind of what's holding up a lot of his numbers. But it's been a guy who has really struggled with, number one, his spin rate has gone down, but then also his control. And that was something I talked about with Adam, with I think it was Joe Musgrove we had talked about, where some guys you won't see a dip in their spin rate a ton, but we might see issues in some of their command. And that could be a result of players not being able to get good grips on the ball. So I'm just talking through this as I'm trying to pull up the spin rate numbers for Molly. But did you get to the Cubs at all?
So what did News God just post? Chichi Gonzalez placed in the COVID protocols.
Oh, that is by the way, that's really good. Chichi Gonzalez sucks. So because that was one of the next teams I was going to talk about is the Angels. That really screws up a lot of stuff too, because Chichi Gonzalez could not be worse of a pitcher. So I'll finish talking about Molly here, then we'll figure out who's actually starting for the Angels, because that's going to change some stuff.
They recalled Antonio Santos from AAA, selected the contract of right-hander pitcher Jesus Tinoco as a replacement player, and have reinstated right-hander Julie Chassin from the COVID IL. My guess is one of the three names that I just said, but I have no idea at this point. That's interesting. That just happened.
I mean, here's something we know, right? It's not going to be a good pitcher who's on the mound for the Rockies, because if he was good, like most of their pitching staff isn't good.
Might be better than Gonzalez though.
That's part of the issue here. Chichi Gonzalez is so bad that, at worst he's comparable. I mean, he's a replacement level player. So the definition of replacement level players, they're replaced by somebody who's, a minor league or whatever, and there's no real drop off. By the way, Tyler Molly just grabbed the spin rates in front of me. For the first month and a half of the season, basically every start, he was at 2,400 to 2,500 average RPMs on his pitches. Over the last month, pretty consistently like the 2,200 range. So, I mean, we're talking about a guy who's getting like 10% less rotation on his pitches per start. But all right, so Chichi Gonzalez. First of all, here's how bad Chichi Gonzalez is. Our props tool over on Awesemo.com, which is free to use, had Chichi Gonzalez. One of the best bets of the day was Chichi Gonzalez under 3.5 strikeouts. That was something that projected to be very positive ROI. Because Chichi Gonzalez this year has a 6.06 ERA, 6.68 expected ERA, and a 13.5% strikeout rate. So this guy is as bad could get. And yeah, I'm really curious to see who's going to be starting for him now, because this is once again going to change my lineups.
Yeah, to steal a phrase, he is cat shit wrapped in dog shit. That is bad, man. That is really bad. Okay. I mean, like in the grand scheme of things, it's not likely to be a massive impact here. The Angels already a relatively popular stack. They were third in our top stack tool before. They were slightly overowned. I don't get the sense that they're going to be keeping in this range unless they're allowed to like bring back old, really good Rockies pitchers, but I don't think they're going to be doing that.
Garrett Hampton's going to be on the mound today.
Oh man. So yeah, no update on Chichi. So I'm going to take us out. Oh, there it is. Lucas Gilbraith will start for the Rockies.
Wait, who was the Mike Hampton?
You're looking for Mike Hampton.
Yeah, Mike Hampton. Yeah, I just said a guy who's currently on the Rockies. Yeah, bring back an old Rocky, like the guy who currently starts for them at second base. But yeah,
right. Lucas Gilbraith.
There's nothing like guys who, by the way, and there's no way we would have even had any sort of expectations these guys would be pitching, because it's guys who, also potentially not even were on the roster earlier. But so Gilbraith, but
he's a straight reliever, no starts this year in AAA, or he's thrown 20 innings all year. He's not going more than 6 outs.
6.27 ERA, 4.47 expected ERA. By the way, I don't even understand how some of these guys get called up to the big leagues. So he's a non-prospect in the Rockies organization. Here are his minor league numbers. Nothing from 2020 on. 2019, he had a 5.81 ERA in A-ball. 2018, he had a 5.04 ERA in A-ball. In rookie ball in 2017, he had a 4.6 ERA. Like, at what point did he progress towards the system? We're like, all right, time to call him up to the big league level now. Like, he was never any good in the minor leagues.
Current date minus birthday. Oh, shit. You got to get up here, man. You're already 25. All right. I got nothing else here for top stacks. We've gone through top pitchers, but what I do have for you right now, and boy, you're going to love it. MLB Live Before Lock is the promo code. Get yourself 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Projections, ownership, premium Slack, lineup builder. On a day like today, with free MLB main slate ownership, you use that promo code MLB Live before lock. You get in for those updated projections. We're getting people scratch left and right. Out goes Aaron Judge. Out goes Chichi Gonzalez. Basically, two opposite things in baseball, which is kind of crazy. But it does have mild impacts. We're constantly updating things behind the scenes. And if you use that promo code MLB Live before lock, you can get in behind the paywall for 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus. You ready to touch on some of these positions individually?
Yes, and I'm also curious to see if this changes the projected ownership for the Angels now.
Yeah, I'm not rerunning anything until I see if, I'm assuming we get an Angels lineup sometime soon. They're the only ones still left, and we're obviously waiting on Jared Walsh. I don't think that me rerunning anything using Chichi Gonzalez, or I don't even remember what that asshole's name is any longer. The new guy.
Lucas Gilbreath. How dare you? How dare you besmirch the good name of Lucas Gilbreath, whose name I may or may not be pronouncing correctly.
Yeah, they'd be better off with Mike Hampton at this point. I just have no reason to rerun it, so I just don't care now. Robosho in chat is a good question. Do we think that the Chichi scratch for COVID puts that game in jeopardy? I don't have a clue.
Listen, if we do, we're going to find out later in the day. And that game walks at what time? Like that game, I mean, it's one of the later games. It's a game that locks at 9:38 Eastern time. So if we're going to know ahead of time, and we're going to be able to swap off it if we have to. Baseball's been pretty good about, for weather situations, it's a total train wreck, but it's not like they can control weather. But when players have gotten ruled out due to COVID, we found out generally pretty early if those games get canceled.
All right, let's get into positions here, and we're going to start it off at catcher. Obviously, not something that we need to really worry about on FanDuel, considering it's not a position. But on DK, who are your favorite catchers for today?
So I am, by the way, actually something I did have to run my lineups for is that we just got the Rockies lineup, and that is my most popular stack. So I did have to run for that. But, can you tell me who yours are? And then I'll know in like a minute.
So you can copy my answers. Ben pulled this with me on the breakfast menu and stole my No House Advantage play. I didn't like that a lot. So unquestionably, Omar Narvaez is at the top in both ownership. He's at 20%, and he does come in at the top of my catcher rankings, but not nearly as big as the gap that ownership is showing. Tyler Stevenson at the top, Dalton Varsho at the top. Those are the three guys that are separating from the pack, and Varsho separating pretty significantly because he's at 4% ownership. So a very nice GPP play as far as I'm concerned.
Exact same answer. No, I am getting to Narvaez a lot, but that's just because I kind of think that he's the right answer. But for me, just because of the teams I'm on and for stacking purposes, Elias Diaz, I mean, I've already said that I'm pretty high on the Rockies, and Elias Diaz, number one, he's a catcher and he's cheap, which already that's a big benefit. But also the team that I'm very heavy on in terms of stacks, Elias Diaz is now hitting fourth for the Rockies. We just got their official lineup. He's 3,400 on DK with 0.5% projected ownership. So that's going to make him somebody that I really want to get to today. That is a very cheap price point for a guy that offers very good leverage and has no ownership and, is in a good lineup spot. Almost every other catcher is batting towards the end of the lineup.
I didn't mention it before, but I have the Marlins as my worst stack. They are 9th overall and the biggest negative leverage spot from everything that I'm looking at, which wanted me to lead to this statement. Jorge Alfaro is at 11% ownership. I think that should be half that. So I think he's pretty massively overowned. Not a guy that I'd be trying to get to at all in any sort of individual spot. That's all I got. First base.
I was going to say he's in my player pool, but I've less than the field.
We move to first base. Would you like me to lead it off once again?
No, I could answer this time. I have a lot of Shohei Ohtani. I don't know if he's in the lineup or not, so that remains to be seen. But as one-off hitters, Rowdy Tellez is somebody who's making into a lot of my lineups. He's actually 3 homers in the last 3 games. He's also cheap at the first base position, nearly min price on DK. He's cheap on FanDuel as well. So anybody who's that cheap with significant power upside is in a good spot. I'm a little bit underweight to the field on Brewer stacks as a whole, But as one-off hitters, guys that I'm still getting to at a decent clip are Rowdy Tellez and Omar Narvaez.
Unquestionably on DK, Shohei Ohtani at the top of the first base rank. I don't really have much else to say. You guys should know that already. Jose Abreu would be second. I do find both of those guys to be slightly over-owned, but you know what you're getting when you're rostering them. I don't really have a ton of guys at the top. Like everybody else is sort of appropriately owned until I get down to this 4% and 5% ownership range. So Trey Mancini, Ryan Mountcastle, DJ LeMahieu, those are some of the guys that I'm getting at least a little bit of leverage on, but nothing too crazy. First base looks pretty normal today.
I just had a lot of, I think it was CJ Cron, who is no longer in the Rockies lineup. So he is no longer going to be in a lot of my lineups, but he was somebody I thought was a good play 10 minutes ago.
Jared Walsh placed on the 10-day IL, so he is not going to be in the Angels lineup. For those of you who've been waiting on that Angels lineup, I assume coming shortly. Yeah.
I also had 8% exposure to Jared Walsh, so he comes out of the player pool now also, and I get to rerun lineups again.
To second base we go. Colton Wong, Jonathan India, taking 36% of the ownership right now. How do you feel about those guys? Where else do you want to go at second?
Staying in line with what a lot of my stacks are. Brendan Rodgers, who's batting second for the Rockies today. He's cheap. He's homered in back-to-back games. Not that it matters all that much to me, but if somebody's going to be hitting well or poorly as of late, I'd prefer they're hitting well if I have them in a lot of my lineups. But Brendan Rodgers, once again, I have the Rockies in my most rostered stack today. I think he offers really good leverage off of Andrew Heaney. Even as a one-off play at this kind of price point, I think it makes sense to get to Rodgers, a guy who has struggled a little bit in the big leagues, but was formerly a top prospect. And, that's always good when somebody's 24 years old and they have a pretty good acumen as a prospect, because this is a guy who just a year ago was considered the number one prospect in the Rockies organization. He was considered a top 15, 20-ish hitting prospect in all of baseball. He didn't fare all that well in his first season in the big leagues, but, still young. And when you consider that highly ranked of a prospect, it stands to reason that he'd improve. So some of the recent improvements we've seen, I think that they're here to stay.
One guy I want to touch on at second that is not really pulling much ownership, just 6%. I had him come out of my Sims at 11. Josh Van Meter is my biggest leverage option at second base. So if you're looking to get over the field on someone, need a one-off, I think Van Meter is going underrepresented.
I have him in 2% of my lineups. Should I change that? Let's see.
Yes, you should make that 22%.
That might be a little high
homers, though. I am tweeting at you being like, I told you it should be 22%.
Hey, listen, I'm going to bump him up a little bit. I'll give him the thumbs up in Fantasy Cruncher, and that'll get me a little bit more based on, because listen, I trust what Josh has to say. I don't need to hear any more info. I just be like, okay, that's enough for me.
Hitting second, just 3,300. That price tag works. Lefty righty matchup against our boy Jordan Lyles. By the way, 172 likes. 28 more. We need to run that number up to 200. That seems like a perfectly reasonable landing spot. So if you haven't hit it yet, hit it now. Let's hit up third base before we talk a little bit about our presenting sponsor, and that would be Jock Market. Who you got at third today?
All right. So at third base, I'm getting to Chris Bryant's actually my most rostered third baseman right now. So with Chris Bryant, I'm kind of surprised he hasn't gotten traded at this point. He's somebody who has been on the trade block for the Cubs. And then he was pulled from a game last week. It was kind of a combination of, number one, hamstring soreness, it was reported as, but there are also rumors at the time that he'd been traded in the middle of the game. But he's come back. He seemed to have no real issues. He's played well. And he's not playing quite at his MVP level season from a few years ago, but Chris Bryant has bounced back in a pretty big way after having a little bit of a drop off. I figure if they do move him, he's going to have a lot of trade value, but all of a sudden the Cubs are kind of finding themselves back in the mix to make a playoff spot. So Chris Bryant is a 133 WRC plus this year. He only had 77 WRC plus last year, struggled with a shoulder injury. But now that we have the Cubs at a 50-52 record, they're around 500. They're within earshot of a wild card spot. So maybe they'll just ride out the team. But given some of the success we've seen from Chris Bryant at the plate this year, he's somebody I like getting to.
I've got Bryant at the top of my list. Came out of the Sims 12%. Wander Franco is the biggest leverage play I've got at third. Came out at 10%, only at 5% ownership. I would want to talk down the Brian Anderson ownership at 13%. Eugenio Suarez at 14%. Both of those guys are my two biggest negative leverage plays that you can find at third.
So Brian Anderson, I actually have, who were the ones you mentioned as the biggest negative leverage plays?
Brian Anderson, Eugenio Suarez.
Okay. I thought you said Isaiah Diaz, who I actually think makes for a kind of good pivot off of Brian Anderson, just because I think it stands to reason that a lot of people who are stacking the Marlins just based on ownership are going to gravitate towards Brian Anderson. You could play Isaiah Diaz, who's batting second for the Marlins, for a very cheap price tag. He's the flat mid on DK, and I think that's a pivot that kind of makes sense.
I have Diaz ranked higher than Brian Anderson, just in like ignoring the leverage. So yeah, I'm in. That'll be perfect.
And then also, I mean, even if you're making a Marlins stack, so we have Brian Anderson right now projected for 11% ownership. Like if you just play Isaiah Diaz as opposed to Brian Anderson, Diaz is currently projected for. I still is projected for 9% ownership, but so I'll take that back. I thought that he was projected for way less ownership than Anderson, but he's also just he's a lot cheaper.
By the way, if anybody's planning on playing a Marlins stack, don't. They're my least favorite team today, and you heard it here first. All right, we've gotten through catchers, first base, second base, and third base. So now we need to talk a little bit about the presenting sponsor here, and that would be Jock Market. They're turning fantasy sports into a stock exchange. You can buy and sell shares of players while the game is going on. It's not just you get to lock and game is over. No, you can continue to sit on your couch for 6 hours from the start at 7:00 all the way through the late night hammers. You can do a very extended amount of time buying and selling different shares, whether that's NBA, MLB, NHL, PGA. Do it at any point in time. You got to use their pregame IPO to pick up the shares of your favorite players. Then you make the moves while the game is going on. You download the app to get started. Use the promo code Awesemo and get up to a $50 bonus on your first deposit. That's for the Awesemo community, guys. You want to take advantage of that. Get that extra money. It's a perfect way to build your bankroll. It's a very fun mechanism and a different way to play on a day-to-day basis. I know Greg and I dove in pretty well for basketball when they first got themselves started. We got to talk to those guys. They were great. I really like the mechanism of playing and like, oh, so-and-so picked up 2 fouls. Like, can I pick him up thinking it's not going to matter? Or, oh no, I have too much of this guy and he has 3 fouls. Now, can I sell this fast enough that I don't take too big of a loss? It's an interesting dynamic, so much different than your normal DFS. I really think you guys should check it out. So go check out Jock Market. On to shortstops. Got 2 more positions to go. Shortstops here. Who is your top shortstop for today?
I bet you could guess.
I bet I can't. Trevor Story.
Yes, it is Trevor Story. It wasn't really that hard to figure out relative to some of the other plays I like today. But once again, I mean, first of all, Trevor Story, for all of the bad hitters that are in the Rockies lineup, here's actually a quality one. So we have somebody who I'm looking at as somebody who's actually a good hitter, and beyond just offering leverage off of Andrew Heaney, he absolutely crushes left-handed pitching over the course of his career. So Trevor Story, I think that is the one Rockies hitter who, at least as a one-off, like not even for stacking purposes, leverage purposes, just as a one-off, whenever he's facing a homer-prone left-handed pitcher, I think Trevor Story has a lot of upside.
He ranks 4th for me. I think he's properly owned at 7 to 8%. Tim Anderson at the top of the heap. That should be no surprise to anyone. I think his ownership is largely correct. Willy Adames is my second guy. He is second in ownership. I think that's largely correct. My biggest negative leverage option.
I could guess it. It's Miguel Rojas.
It is Miguel Rojas. He is the guy that I would be trying not to get to. I am very anti-Marlins today.
Yeah, you hate them with a passion.
That's fine by me. I've always hated Derek Jeter. Except for the fact that he used to give out goodie bags after hookups. That I can get behind.
Yeah, imagine you go over to like a one-night stand with Derek Jeter, and then he gives you like a fruit basket on the way out.
No, you get like iPads and all sorts of fun stuff. Or whatever the technology was that you had Palm Pilots and stuff back then.
No, I'm sure it was like plastic fruit and like something you got at the dollar store. Like it was like a plain T-shirt he got for $1. It was massively disappointing.
From what I remember, it was actually like a real legitimate bag of technology and fun stuff, like a Yankees shirt. Some sort of technology, maybe like an iPod video or something. I can't think about how long ago this was and what sort of technology existed.
That's still kind of weird though. Just the idea where it's like, do you think also he had a bunch of them stocked up where like, so like the girl, like he opens it up.
From what I understand, yes.
So it's like, there's a girl standing next to him. He opens up the closet and there's just 30 of them piled up. He's like, this one's for you.
Yeah. From what I understand, yes, he had them lined up like he was handing out the bags at a wedding.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, I wonder, was it, when you get like one of those just spam type emails where it just has the name that they have to written into, and sometimes they forget to write it in. I think it's a thing where also he's taking a pen out and he's like writing their name into like a pre-written script ahead of time also.
Thank you, insert girl here, for your consensual relations.
Hey, it's a good alibi.
Yeah, it really is. And look, it worked out pretty well for him. I think everything went swimmingly for Derek Jeter in all facets of life. Let's talk outfielders. Obviously, this one's going to look a little bit different. Who are your favorite outfielders for today?
Let's see. So the outfielders, I have by the way, Alexis Brown in the chat, very upset that I said that Derek Jeter didn't give out good gift baskets. It was just a joke that didn't really land. It's not that big of a deal. Like we're just talking about what Derek Jeter used to give out to girls he hooked up with. It's not that big of a deal. I still think it's
like
weird.
Alexis Brown is a little mad that they didn't get one of those gift baskets.
I still think it's weird that he was giving out gift baskets to people on the way out. Shohei Ohtani is my most rostered outfielder today. I just think it makes a whole lot of sense. There's not that many hitters to pay up for, surprisingly, on this slate. We don't have a lot of the normal high-end studs to pay up for today. There's the Red Sox Blue Jays game. That's going to be a 7-inning game. That's going to cap everybody's upside there a little bit. So Ohtani, who seemingly homers just about every single game, he's by far the best guy to pay up for.
Whew, okay. He is also my top guy. I have Justin Upton actually under-owned at his 12% mark. He would be the first guy that I would want to mention. Everybody at the major top of my list is all already in double-digit ownership. So some of the guys that I would want to hit on that aren't pulling ownership that I would get in like maybe 2x to 3x the field. Manny Margot, only 3% owned. I have him at 10%. Dalton Varsho, 4% to 10% in that regard. Rafael Ortega looks to be under-owned. DJ Stewart, a little bit. Do you know who my most over-owned outfielder is?
Let's see.
This one should be pretty easy.
Yeah, I would say Starling Marte, except he's not going to be an option because he's no longer on the Marlins. So I know it's somebody from the Marlins. Let's see. Oh, no, you're going to say Eloy Jimenez.
No, I'm not going to say Eloy Jimenez.
Then you're going to say Adam Duvall.
Adam Duvall is correct. 19% ownership, came out of my Sims at 7. Good guess, though. Now we move on to the best part of the show. I haven't done this in a while, but it went quite well yesterday on Live Before Lock, so we're going to do it again. Who is your dong pick for today? Who homers on this slate?
I mean, Shohei Ohtani's kind of a cop-out answer, but that is the right answer.
No, you're not going to the Chris Baggs school of picking dongs.
Let's see. If I have to go to somebody who has less ownership, I think Rowdy Tellez is a cheap option who is picking up some ownership, but still single-digit ownership on Rowdy Tellez. I'm also overweight to the field on him. So somebody who I think has a realistic chance to hit a home run is cheap, and I'm overweight too. I'll go with Rowdy Tellez.
Let's see. Who could I take that's not really pulling any ownership? Do I like this one? Let me make sure. Not somebody I've talked about. I don't even think I said his name today. You know what? This one's happening for me. Not that I'm going out on a limb here. It's not going to be crazy. Dwayne Lopez gets it. Pete Alonso going yard. He's showing up 6th in my home run model, not pulling any ownership. And don't forget, I gave you Pete Alonso as the home run derby winner. So I know when Pete Alonso is going to go yard.
Yeah, I like how I wasn't allowed to pick Shohei Ohtani, and then instead you just pick here's like arguably the second or third best power hitter in baseball. But he's not picking up that much ownership. I'm overweight to that stack, so I don't have an issue with it.
He's fully unowned today. Ohtani's at 28%. If you want me to work my way down and give you somebody else that's unowned, I'll stay in that same game and give you Jock Peterson.
Okay. I have no issue with that. I have no issue with that at all.
I have Jock 15th.
Ohtani, here's a question. How much of a gap is there between Ohtani and everybody else in your model?
So what I do is just simply sort by how many expected home runs I have hit for the day. So frequency is technically a little bit different, but just in the aggregate, I have Ohtani expected to hit 0.31 home runs. Next closest guy is Stanton at 0.23.
Yeah, he is
so
much farther. And the other thing too that I would
35% more likely, or 35% higher.
And the other thing too is it's kind of hard to really properly contextualize him just because he wasn't even good last year as a hitter. So it's something that, I think that just models and stuff like that going forward, like if he continues to do this over a longer stretch of time, he's going to start to look really ridiculous in terms of baseball projection, just due to be something so unprecedented. Like he legitimately hit 70 home runs one year at this kind of pace, and that wouldn't really be anything that would be a massive shock just given what he's done. But picking back on what we talked about, I just pulled up our MLB prop tool, and I'm going to look at which player is the best yes bet to hit a home run. And I have to go down a little bit because I'm trying to remember which players have already played so far today. But we're going to like this one. So of the players going tonight, the best value to hit a home run, Brandon Lau, 20% chance to hit a home run, odds plus 450. That is an 8% expected ROI. A stack that both you and I are overweight to the field on. Brandon Lau of the Rays, picking up the best chance to hit a bet relative to his odds at sportsbooks.
I have him 43rd out of 172. So I like that. It gets like the difference between 20 and 50 is pretty blurry. Like you start to become pretty similar. So I have one last trivia question for you. Maybe it's not trivia, but one last question for you before we take maybe one or two questions. Do you have any idea who is dead last in my home run model for today?
Dead last. I would like to say, let me. This
obviously this is a preposterous question because it's a guy that sucks.
But from what standpoint is this? Just the player least likely to home run on the entire slate, or?
Yes, yeah. So like when I said Ohtani is expected for 0.31, this guy is projected for 0.03. AL team, if it helps.
All right, AL team. Is it Santiago Espinal?
It is not. I don't even know who that is.
He's I'm
just kidding. He's second, actually. It's
basically I was pretty close.
A virtual tie.
I was pretty close. I should get credit for
that. You're off by 0.0029 home runs. The answer is Nicky Lopez.
Estrada. Damn.
Estrada was 15th from the bottom. So Nicky Lopez, the least likely home run for today per everything that I've got. And we have 2 minutes to go until lock. Any questions that anybody has, get them in now. It might not matter. How are you feeling about tonight's slate?
Listen, it's baseball. I feel good about the choice I've made, but it's either going to be with most slates, when you play really contrarian with baseball, either goes very well or very poorly. So we'll see. I think over the long haul, like I said, I think being underweight to Heaney and trying to target the Rockies in this spot, I think over the course of the season, it'll hit more times than not relative to ownership. And when it hits, it's going to be, like a 10 or 15x slate, but it's going to.
I got to cut you off. The Milwaukee Brewers are finalizing a deal to acquire infielder Eduardo Escobar from the Arizona Diamondbacks. Escobar is in the lineup right now. If you have him, just something I want to put out there. Apologies for cutting you off.
No, it's fine. And then also we have to consider that we don't know who the Brewers are trading. So the Brewers could also be. When does that game start?
Game starts at 8:05. So you have time to make these moves, but just so people can be aware, that is in the cards. When I first started reading it, I was like, oh God, here we go. What is this about to be? Where's Aaron Judge getting traded to?
Hey, not that often we have news that pops up in baseball shows, but we had a few news items today.
We really did. And we've got about 20 seconds to go. So I don't know. You can kind of do whatever at this point. Ilya with the question, Escobar isn't playing, ? Correct. I don't think he's going to get to Milwaukee in time.
No, he's not on the team.
Actually, he's not going to get to Pittsburgh in time because that game legitimately starts right now.
Yeah. By the way, Linda Carl is somebody else who likes to troll us. Yeah, we know Judge isn't getting traded.
Yeah. That's no. That would not be a lucrative move for the Yankees, nor a Yankees typical move. I mean, should they and will they are two very different discussions. You can make a legitimate case from a money and what you can get back standpoint, but that ain't happening. But that's it. We're locked. Greg, anything else you want to touch on? Anything else you want to plug before we get out of here and turn this one over to the MMA strategy crew?
No, I would just like to thank Derek Jeter for sponsoring the show.
Perfect. Guys, keep your eyes peeled tomorrow. NBA draft live stream. It's going to be myself and Laffy with a bunch of people popping in to say hi throughout some of the picks. But we're going to be breaking it down probably for the entirety of the lottery, but we'll see where we end up. I don't know how much I can have Laffy drink tomorrow, but we'll see. Good luck tonight, everybody. Thank you so much to Jock Market for being the presenting sponsor. Hit the like button. Subscribe to this channel. Awesemo Odds, Awesemo Fantasy Football, all that good stuff. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.